Hello everyone. It is time for another live stream. Hi James, your tank is looking great. Hello Mr. Reef Buster. Hi Rick. Hi John. Hello Harkins Aquatics. Remind me what you got from me that worked. I think you took a Nero 5 cover and put it on a different pump. Hi Nick, hi Todd, hi Tyler. Santana's Reef. There's a whole bunch of y'all here. Sound is working, good. All right, so let me switch to this. Hey guys, how are you doing? So, it's a thunderstorm here. So, if the power suddenly goes out, this stream is gonna end very abruptly. Someone mentioned last week that they wanted me to talk about flow, and I thought, you know, we haven't really tackled it, and I mean, there's not a lot to say about that topic, but there is good information that you should know. So, you know, I feel like it's kind of a short topic. Let me switch glasses so I can see what the heck I'm looking at. All right, hey, there you go. And I'm way too bright, like usual. I have the forehead of a god. Well, nothing I can do about it. It's already set up. All right, so I want to catch you guys up on things. This whole week, I had my mother here in town. I just dropped her off at the airport about an hour ago. And she's heading home, which means now I can get back to gluing orders. Because like I mentioned to you guys last week, I couldn't take a chance with her health, putting around the fumes from the glue and the solvents, and of course sanding the corners, because she only has one lung. And so I don't take any chances with her. And a lot of you said we understand. And some of you may have orders pending, so hoping to get those out this week and get them on their way to you. And I'm sorry you've had to wait as long as you've had to. I also wanted to know what you guys got for Christmas. I had something adorable I wanted to show you, and I don't see it anywhere now. But, oh, here it is. So I got this little guy. It's a little Nemo Matchbox car. And super cute. And that came from my son as a gift, which I'm sure my grandson will play with when he comes over. So I got that. I got the world's tiniest book about friends. And yeah, it's a little book. It's got pictures and everything. I don't know how they squeeze 10 seasons into this, but I'll be checking it out. This one I shared with you guys on Instagram and on Facebook. So this is an underwater photography master class to educate myself on best practices for shooting in the ocean. And since I go scuba diving, it's always good to know more. So I will be reading this one. Apparently it's a very good book, very well respected, and I look forward to being able to take pictures that may come close to this quality one day. We shall see. And of course, Star Wars is going on, so I got myself a little keychain with a guy from one of the X-Wings, or the Y-Wings actually. Hey, I'm going to throw this out there. I still haven't seen Star Wars yet, no spoilers, but if someone in my local area is wanting to see it tonight or tomorrow, let me know and we can go together. I think that could be fun. My son's in town. He might want to go to Star Wars tonight. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I definitely want to see it before I see something on social media that spoils the ending for me. I'd rather just go in and just enjoy it before it's too late. So that's going to happen. Something that I did this week is I made something called a linzer torta, which is something that my aunt taught me to make. I'm the only one in the family that makes it. She has died and passed on. And so I am the guy that makes it. So this recipe was handed down generation to generation. It actually starts out of Austria, but I'm half Swiss, so we have seized it as our own. And so this is half of what it looks like. I'll unwrap it for you. And the recipe is actually on my personal page. So this is half of it. Comes with a knife. Anyway, this is a chocolate and almonds and of course flour and sugar and eggs. And there's cinnamon in there. There's kirsch, which is a type of brandy. There's a raspberry preserves. It's delicious. It's my favorite dessert in the world. And I don't make it very often because all it does is make me fat. But so I made that for my son as his Christmas present And he was so excited to get it when he realized what he was unwrapping. He was like, oh my God. So he was really, really happy. And since the mixer was dirty and I had butter and everything out, I made one for myself as well. Like I said, I'm the only guy in my family that makes it. And I don't know anyone on the planet that makes it as good. And that's not me being vain or arrogant. It literally, I've tried a few different ones. Like when I went to the Basler Zoo in, Basel, Switzerland, it was terrible. They don't even put chocolate in the dough. And it just wasn't good. And this is very moist. The reason you keep it wrapped in foil, it actually gets better and better the longer it sits on the counter. So it's not something you throw in the fridge. Anyway, it's kind of expensive to make. The ingredients will easily cost you $20 to make one. But it makes a lot of people smile. And anyone that doesn't like it just means more for me, which is awesome because I love it. And I can eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner until it's gone. And matter of fact, when you guys weren't looking, I was snacking. So there we go. All right. Also, I love marzipan. Got my own stocking this year for my daughter-in-law. And inside of it, I have some of these adorable little marzipan pigs. So that was a gift from my mom. And she gave me a shirt because mothers give shirts. The one thing I had to do with my mother was told her, quit giving me socks and underwear. I don't want that for Christmas. And she was like, but, and I was like, no, don't do it. It's a terrible gift. Give me something nice, something awesome. And so she stopped finally. And it was funny because, about a year later, year and a half later, I was like, man, I don't have any nice socks and underwear anymore. It was totally my fault. But I'm just happy to buy my own and not receive that as a present. It just seems weird. I'd much rather get something awesome as a gift rather than getting underwear. So I squashed that for her. Anyway, I want to catch you up on a few more details. So this is our last stream of the year, and this is our 40th stream for this year, which makes sense because I traveled a lot during 2019. There was plenty of weekends where I just wasn't in town and we couldn't do a stream. But we did 40. That's pretty good out of 52. And a lot of you guys tuned in. I looked at the analytics for YouTube and it showed that over 2 million views happened this year on this channel, which is a big number. And it's one of the reasons that so many people know me and recognize me when I'm out and about. And, I'm just glad that they're watching and that they're learning stuff to the point where they remember who I was. I mean, that's great. And, I'm just here to help. And that's all I've always done. I started with a website where there was no face at all, and people enjoyed learning things and sending me an email saying that really helped me, or where on your website do you have this information? I would give them the link, and it worked out really, really well. A few more things that happened. Oh, by the way, in your comments, I'm going to be reading these comments afterwards. Tell me what you guys got for Christmas. I really want to see. So include all the goodies. I want to know. All right. Instagram just had a milestone. The Instagram melevsreef channel or page, or whatever you want to call it, just hit 10,000 followers. That was one of those things that I've been watching grow very slowly. And I'm friends with a beautiful young lady who has a dog who in no time at all got 16,000 followers. And Jennifer Aniston opened up an Instagram page after all these years, and she had 4 posts up and had 12 million followers. So I mean, my little 10,000 is nothing, but it was nice to see it hit that benchmark finally. It was one of those numbers I wanted to reach at some point. Also, the Club melevsreef, I'll throw that on the screen as a reminder to you guys. Let me scooch over here. So Club melevsreef has been around now for a year and a couple of months, and we just got up to 6,000 members. We just crossed that line, and we are exactly at 6,000 members right now, unless somebody chooses to leave, and then we'll be at 5,999 until I add someone new in. It's a great group. We are very friendly. We're very helpful. But I will tell you, I'm starting to notice some negativity squeezing into the group, and I am not going to allow it. I'm just going to go through and start truncating. I will delete stuff that bothers me because I want you guys to feel safe and happy and not belittled. And so that was the whole point of the group. That's why we have rules in the group. And so heads up, if you're getting a little snarky this time of year, rein it in or go drink some eggnog and get away from your keyboard. And let's just keep being helpful for each other. So that's the point of the group. And I've told the moderators, heads up, I'm about to go nuclear on some people. And they were happy to hear it. They like it when I clean house. Also, we have this on the screen. So you guys have been shopping at melevsreef.com for months, and I really appreciate anything that you do buy from the website. I'll show this up here. And as of right now, we're at 1,062 customers for 2019. So we totally hit my 1,000 sales number that I was hoping to hit. And who knows, we might be at 1,070 by the end of the year. So that's really exciting. And everyone that purchases during the month of December is entered into the contest to win one of two prizes. I'm just going to take all the names of the people that purchased anything during December, all the way through the end of the month, so we've got a few more days. And then I'm just going to do a random number drawing, and we'll figure out what line that was, and that line will be that name, and that name will be contacted, and they will be given the choice of one of two prizes that will be shipped to them free of charge. So that is wrapping up as the year ends. Thank you guys so much for buying things from my website. I know you have lots of options out there, but this is the only thing I do for a living. I mean, besides stand in front of a camera on YouTube, all I do is answer emails and texts and messages and messengers and FaceTime and Skype and you name it. I'm talking to someone about aquariums. I actually had to actively or intentionally not talk about aquarium stuff on the 25th. I was like, that's it. I'm getting a day off from anything aquarium related, and I wouldn't even answer texts. I was like, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And that way I could just enjoy a day of family and festivities and gifts and just soaking up my mom being in town and my grandson being in town, and it was nice to get away from work. But as soon as I got home, it was right back to answering stuff, processing orders, getting things boxed up, shipping things out. So that was done. My neck is still a disaster. I mean, obviously it's not getting any better until I have surgery, so I've just been kind of doing the best I can with it and taking pills. And yesterday, or 2 days ago, was migraine day, which means that I pretty much was worthless and I did nothing all the way until midnight when my neck finally loosened up slightly and I felt a little bit better. And then Friday I got a lot of orders out and shipped out, about 12, 15 orders, but I could tell it's been really short with my mom. And it was just because I was hurting. And so, I apologized to her and we went to dinner. And all is well in the world. So, all right, so that's kind of catching you up on everything. Yeah, so let's get into the topic of flow, because flow is so important in our aquariums, and a lot of times people are they're just not aware of what they need to do in their tank. They don't. Just because you have a certain power head is not the end of the story. And there are so many brands out there, and I know you're like, well, should I buy this or should I buy that? This one's so expensive, this one's so cheap. How long will this last? How easy is it to clean? And I'm going to talk specifically about what goes in the display tank first, and then we'll talk about what goes on in flow in the sump, but I want to stay on one topic first. So when I had my 29-gallon aquarium, it was about 30 inches long and 12 inches front to back and probably about 21 inches tall. I started off with a MaxiJet. Most people did. Matter of fact, back then, I think I had a Penguin first, which a Penguin pump was just a power head you got at the fish store. And, it had a nozzle, and you just hang it with a clip, or you use suction cups to hold it to the glass, and then it would just move water through the tank. And, typically, that was your flow. If you had, back in the day, people had under gravel filters, which was basically a plastic plate with a bunch of holes carved into it, and you'd put your crushed coral on top, and there's two riser pipes coming up, and you'd push air stones down those, and they would bubble inside the riser pipes, and the bubbles would rise and flow into the tank. You'd see the bubbles hitting the surface and moving across. And it was sucking the water through the substrate, through the plastic grate, out the tubes, and up. And that was the circulation of the tank. And to add a power head was like a whole new thing. That was not what people did back then. Also, there were canister filters being used, where you're just moving water, with a pump into the canister filter and back up to the tank, and that was the flow. But that was because it was fish only. And with fish, flow is not nearly as critical as it is with reef tanks. And this whole channel is all about reef keeping and the things that our corals need. So people have purchased, I'm just going to list a bunch of different names of products that come to mind. Vortec is a huge one for me. It's the one pump I rely on 100%. There are the gyres that came out in the last 4 or 5 years. MaxiJets have been around forever. There's Rossmont, which is a AC powered pump. CoralView has other pumps like MaxSpec that have the ability to dial things down to, because it's DC powered, you can run at a lesser flow instead of just plugging it in on or off. And then others would use some kind of a large pump on the floor in what's called a closed loop application. And with a closed loop, you drill a hole somewhere low in the tank, like around here, and water would flow down into the pump and then push back up and back into the tank, and it was pure water moving through it. There was no air bubbles because it wasn't sucking air from the top. It was taking water from the middle of the tank and sending it back basically to the middle of the tank or slightly higher. And so you were sucking water out and you're pushing water in, and this created some kind of flow in the tank. And people that did closed loop applications oftentimes had multiple closed loops, especially the bigger the tank. They might have 3 or 4 different pumps going underneath, or they had one pump underneath that would go into something called the Ocean's Motions device, which kind of looked like a plus sign so water went into the base of it, and then water would come out 4 different holes. And there was a motor turning in the very center. And as that motor turned, it would allow water to go out one pipe at a time. So you'd have flow, and then flow, and then flow, and then flow. And it was constantly making this change with a very slow moving motor that would pivot this. Now, the downside, of course, is if you had to take it apart and clean it, you had to cap off your pipes to make sure no water drains out, or close ball valves. Remove the part, of course water is going to flow out of it. Take it apart to clean it, make sure everything's working right. If something had failed, you had to replace the inner part of the motor was turning, or replace the motor itself. It's kind of a pain in that regard, but a lot of people were using them because they didn't want to see a power head in their tank. So here's just an example of power head. This is a MaxiJet 900 that's from Marineland. They've been around, Marineland has been making these pumps forever, and they're perfectly good pumps. They will last you years, not months. They're just not beautiful. They're kind of ugly to look at in your tank because we look at beautiful corals, so the last thing we want to see is a chunk of plastic, especially a dark chunk of plastic, that is in our tank. Now, they always come with a bunch of pieces, and this kit allows you to change its look from a regular MaxiJet looking thing. Let me just get you the MaxiJet look first, and then we'll switch it. I feel like I'm missing one important little piece, and I don't see it in front of me, which is weird. But this is a typical MaxiJet, and then this little guy would be mounted on the tip. That's why I feel like there's a little piece missing. But this would mount on it, and then you could tilt it, or you could even turn it upside down to blow downward into the tank to create some flow if it was up high. Normally, we don't recommend suction cups because suction cups tend to not hold on. But you could put this guy on the side, and you have 3 suction cups, and you'd press it to the glass, and now it's staying up high. One of the tricks of, if you're going to use any kind of a power head like this, like a MaxiJet, is make sure that you secure the power cord, so if the suction cups let go, the pump can't go anywhere. If you just have the cord just hanging there, and it lets go, it could literally pull itself down into the tank and blow your sand everywhere. So you don't want that to happen. Now, here are the suction cups. The reason we don't like suction cups in saltwater is because they usually let go. They get hard over time, and then they just lose their grip and they stop holding on. Let's try holding it onto the tank. All right, so we'll see how long that lasts. No, I'm just kidding. It'd probably stay there for days. But eventually it'll let go and it'll fall off. So what we do instead, there is also a hard bracket that you can put on instead, that you would install this little guy on the side, and then you would press this through here. I think it's this way. Yeah. And then this would be hanging on the trim of the tank, and now in theory it should stay in place and not collapsing your tank. So this is a very inexpensive power head. This one moves 230 gallons an hour. The MaxiJet 1200 moves 295 gallons an hour. And you have to measure your tank. You have to say, okay, my tank is a 100-gallon tank. I want 10 times the flow turnover in the tank, so you need 1,000 gallons an hour. So you need 3 or 4 maxi jets if you were putting maxi jets across the back. Most people would not do that. I'm just making an example to kind of bring you up to speed. Now, there's another option with this pump. You can take it apart. You can remove the impeller. You can install this other impeller. And then you can install this shroud. And now it's a stream pump with a propeller in there versus an impeller that is straight blades that just moves water. The way the impeller, I'm going to go back a second here and then we'll come back to it again. So the impeller, you clean them from time to time. You just got to take a pipe brush and clean in there. You take this thing, you clean off with a toothbrush, you put it back into place. You reaffix the front, and then water would suck in here and it would blow out here. This piece keeps falling off. I have no idea why. Normally they stay on really well. But this protects livestock from being sucked into the pump and being killed. It's very easy for an anemone or something like that to get on here and get sucked, and even sucked through it and into the pump. And this is something that happens to a lot of people. And so we always say cover this with a sponge, which doesn't look good. So you already have something that essentially isn't, I mean, come on, let's be realistic. It is an eyesore. This does not look natural. It doesn't look like a reef. It looks like a man-made pump. So adding a black sponge on there adds more to the thing you don't like looking at, realistically. Which is why people did closed loops where they could hide the pump on the floor and just have pipes. But you had a lot of PVC pipes going everywhere. Okay, so that's the regular MaxiJet. And then like I said, if we switch it to a flow pump, we would put in this impeller. It's got a blade, and then it's got this shroud that goes over it. And then you would secure it in your tank with another type of holder. So here's one. And the water is sucking in through the sides and blowing out the front. So again, this is where you'd have to put your sponge material if you have anemones, because you don't want them to get sucked in. Now, like I said, you get a Marineland MaxiJet, you get a Cobalt MaxiJet, which by the way, they're out of stock nationally, but I heard they're coming in the 1st of January again, so I've got an order out to get more in. But for right now, people have been ordering pumps from my website. I've been substituting with Marineland, which one customer said, why would you do that? And I was like, because I want you to have a pump and not wait. And you'll not have a bad experience with Marineland. If there's any kind of problem, there's a warranty. And they're a really good pump. I've been using them for many, many years. I don't have any dislike for Marineland whatsoever. Okay. I did want to talk about however you use this. Whether you use it as a flow pump, or if you, I'm sorry, I put it on backwards. If you use it as a flow pump, or if you use it like a MaxiJet, like the original design. When it's in your tank, the higher up it is, the more likely it'll suck in air from the surface of the water. See, I'm kind of holding this up with that water right behind me to kind of give you an idea of the height of the tank. If you were very close to the surface, it would suck in air and it would blow bubbles into your tank. Now, if you were in a situation where the power has gone out on your tank, you know, the power's out in the house and you're using battery backups like a UPS or a power inverter, you would plug this pump, you know, into the power inverter to keep flow in the tank and lift it up as high as you can, so it's literally chopping up the water and mixing air and pushing it into the tank. Something this small won't use a lot of power, but it is going to suck the battery dry over time. So hopefully your power issue will be resolved shortly. If not, I always recommend owning a generator where you can add gasoline and you can pull the cord and get it started, and you keep it running and you add more gas until the power finally comes on. For some people, power's only out for a minute or two, others for an hour or two, and sometimes it can be days or even a week. That's a whole other scenario that's not this topic. But raising a power head up high in your tank to add air is a known method that works. And it's easy because you're just going to rearrange where the end is, whether it's magnetic or it's suction cups or it's a strap, or you just take a zip tie and you pull it up high and have it hanging at an angle. You know, that's all you got to do. Okay, now, something else I want to talk about that's the exact same thing. We'll go back to MaxiJet mode. One of the reasons I like the MaxiJet is because you can change the orientation of the nozzle by turning the piece. So if this is mounted in your tank like this, going up, and you wanted to get flow that direction, you can just point the nozzle. And there's only a certain couple of spots where you can't put it because it'll come right off, because that's how you disconnect to clean it. So you have to find that sweet spot that still holds on. I'm also using MaxiJets to this day to clean my sump with the VCA nozzle, the vacuum nozzle, and I can hook it up and I can vacuum my sump clean and pump the water into a filter sock or into a bucket nearby. So being able to change the orientation of the nozzle is super helpful. Now back to the 29-gallon aquarium. When I was running MaxiJets, like I said, I had one in there and it wasn't enough. So I added another one. And then I added another one. And I felt like there still wasn't enough flow in the tank for the corals. And remember, each one, it's drawing water in and pushing it out. So you're not going to lose any. It's not going to get slower because of at certain depths or anything like that. It's rated for 295 gallons an hour. You should be getting 295 gallons an hour no matter where it is in the tank. And in this situation here, what I ended up doing, I needed flow down low in my tank. I actually put it upside down on my sand bed where the motor sat on the sand and it was about 2 inches off the sand, and flow just moved across behind my rock work and created this laminar flow in my tank without it being able to fall or tumble. It was just sitting on the sand where it had nowhere to go. And that worked out really, really well. I just had the power head going up in the back corner and this just moved water behind the tank. If you didn't want it to blow behind the rock work, you could turn the nozzle that way and set it on the sand and let it shoot water to the front of the tank and bounce off the front glass. If you are using 2 MaxiJets in a small tank, let's just say it's a 30-gallon or a 40-gallon breeder, you could have a MaxiJet in one corner with the nozzle pointing at a 45-degree angle. You can put another one on this side with a 45-degree angle, and the water would be hitting the front glass and deflecting off the glass and coming back into the tank. And that's a known method that works. If you're using the little deflector piece on the front, like I mentioned before, you could have one on the front pointing up slightly to create some ripples on the surface of the water so your water looks a little churned up and isn't just stagnant. You don't want to see the water on the surface of your tank looking oily. It shouldn't have a weird like blanket or oil slick. You don't want to see a bunch of junk on there. It should all be chopped up and moving. And if I change this one camera for you guys, let me see if I can change this for you slightly. This camera was acting up today. I was wondering if I had to buy a new one. But if you look at the surface, you can see how it's nice and crystal clear. There's nothing, stagnant. There's nothing still. Water is constantly moving all there across the tank and through those teeth into the overflow box. And that's what you want your surface to look like on your tank, no matter what size your tank is. Small or big, you want the surface to be nice and clean and nothing amassing on the surface. That oily slick is bad. Now, if you want to remove an oil slick, the simplest solution, it's a trick, is to take a piece of printer paper, the paper that you put in an inkjet printer, just regular paper, just lay a sheet on the surface on that oil and peel it off, and most of it's gone. And then you take another piece of paper and set it on there and peel it off. You can use something like a paper towel, but paper towels kind of fall apart. Printer paper is perfect. There's no print on it, there's no ink on it, it's just paper, and the stuff sticks to it like a magnet. You can just peel it off the water, and you have a nice clean surface. And you can even take the paper and kind of, I don't know if it makes sense, drag it across the surface to kind of move the oil to one end and just peel it out. And you can make the water nice and clean. And there might be a time where you actually need to do that once or twice, and then you'll never have to do it again. Hopefully it won't be a forever thing. But if you have one of your power heads pushing water up to the surface to kind of cause it to ripple, that will also keep the oil slick away. An air stone, if you're doing that with bubbles, will kind of do that too, but it might just push the oil slick to the opposite corner. So keep that one in mind. Now, the downside of low flow in your tank is it leads to things like cyanobacteria. And I know you guys hate cyanobacteria, that red blanket. And whenever people say, I need help, I can't get rid of this, everyone always says, increase your flow. It's the automatic de facto answer they always tell people. And that's true. You can add flow. There's always room for more flow in your tank. But it's not usually the solution, in my opinion, because it takes too damn long to get there. I want you to solve the problem in a matter of days, not weeks. So if you can take your tank situation and look at what's going on, and if you literally see a problem where you need flow there, yes, go ahead and add some. But if everything's correct, just treat the tank with red cyano RX and kill the stuff in a few days. I was talking with Anthony from VCA, and he's been dealing with cyano in his tank for over a year. And he finally tried Red Sign RX with the way I recommended it, which is to not to run your protein skimmer at all and just let it work. And he had to use double dose, and he had to do it a couple of times, and he's going to do it another time, but he's finally almost got it completely eradicated from his tank, and he's starting to like his tank again. So waiting a whole year is the worst. If you have a problem, you want to solve it within a matter of days, maybe weeks, but it should never be months. It should never be a year, because you didn't set up a tank to have something looking ugly forever. You want it to look right. I also want to talk about this whole thing. Like I said, it's all about flow. So there's so many things to take into consideration, and I'm trying not to leave anything out since that's our topic of the day. But one other method that you can put flow in the tank would be to use something like lock line, which this is lock line. This is 3/4 inch, by the way, and it comes with a threaded fitting that would then go into your PVC connection in your tank. You got to press these two together. They have a tool for this that I've never bought. I just squish it really hard until my hand hurts, and then usually it goes together. Got it. Whew, that was hard. And then you've got this type of tip, which is a nozzle. I actually like the nozzle the best. A lot of people use one that looks like a flat diffuser with like a little skinny slit to like spread water this way, but I don't really like that. I feel like it's stopping the flow too much. All right, so now we've got some lock line with a nozzle on the end that can be angled or pointed however your plumbing is, from coming out of the overflow box. And you can say, I want flow to go that direction, or I want it to go this direction, or I want it to go over here. Or some people will even get a Y connector and have two of them coming out. But you're not getting more flow, you're just changing it because you're splitting the source of the flow. So if, let's say, 500 gallons an hour is coming out, it's coming out 500 gallons an hour out of here. That's not exactly true. It's going to be less because every single knuckle creates a little bit of resistance, which slows it down more and more. But if you put a Y connector, it's not going to be 500 out of each one because it's coming at 500 in the first place, so it might be coming out 250 on each side or 200. If you do the flat diffuser, I think it's even less because it never looks like it's coming out fast out of those. So that's why I don't use them. I prefer something larger. But if you prefer way more flow, you take off that piece that I put on here and now I can't get off. Oh my God, I can't get off. Watch my face turn super red on live camera. All right. Got it off. This is a nozzle from VCA. This one is the 3/4 inch nozzle. And it's designed to fit on the end of lock line. God, I hope it's easier than that thing I just plucked off of there. Yes, that was easy. So now you've got a flow accelerator. This one has blades on the inside, and as water is drawn in through these little gaps on the, see my skin showing up through there a little bit? There's a series of 5 different gaps. And as the water is drawn in, it goes out of these curlicue blades and into your tank, and it increases the flow. So if your flow coming through here is 500 gallons an hour, it's actually going to come out even higher because it's drawing in additional water through the sides. And because of these blades within, it's actually randomizing and it's coming out at different angles, constantly changing, which is part of what we call chaotic flow. And chaotic flow is the best flow you can have in a tank. Most people want chaotic way more than they want constant. You could have a pump that does wave, and it creates a wave that constantly is doing this, and your water's moving up and down, and the corals are doing this thing all day long. That's another method. That's not chaotic. Chaotic is where the water just keeps this way, and it's coming this way, and it's coming down, and it's going up, it's coming from the front, they're slamming together. That's the kind of flow that is typical on a reef. Reefs get chaotic flow, they're getting pounded from every different angle, and we'll never be able to recreate a reef to that degree, but we can always add more flow to our tank. So the RFGs, random flow generators, are 3D printed from VCA. I sell them in my shop, and you can press this one right onto the 3/4 inch. And if you have 1-inch plumbing, this is the 1-inch nozzle with the knuckle, with the knuckle that screws into your threads and then you press it on. But some people wanted a few extra knuckles, so VCA has now supplied the 1-inch knuckles designed specifically for theirs. You cannot just grab any 1-inch lock line. It has to be theirs so it can work together. Something else you need to know about using these in your tank is that if you have it near the surface of the water, again, it's going to draw in air through that intake and blow bubbles into your tank. So it needs to be down, and normally I recommend about 2 to 4 inches down from the surface. This one right here is a 1-inch RFG, and it is probably 4 inches down from the top. Maybe 3, 3.5, 4. So, and it never does that geyser, you know, where it draws in the little air bubbles and shoots it out. It's low enough where it won't do that. So that's very important that you know that. Also, one more thing about lock line. If you were to point this down, because you screwed it in to the plumbing and now it's up high and it's shooting down to create flow in the tank, when the power goes out and the water starts draining back into your sump, it will go to the lowest point, which would be this thing. So with this being this far down in the tank, your water level would drain and drain and drain because it's siphoning right out until it finally hits here. That's a lot of water that could be in your sump, or even overflow the sump and fill the room. So make sure you drill a couple of holes underneath the lock line. I like to put in 2 1/4-inch holes. You can put one in this knuckle and one in this knuckle, a 1/4-inch hole underneath. And the idea is that when the water drains 1/2 inch, which would be this far down, it sucks in some air and breaks the siphon instantly, even though this is going much lower into the tank. So you put anti-siphon holes in the bottom side of your lock line. And the easiest way to do that is either turn the knuckles upward, drill your 2 holes, and then twist it back down. Or sometimes you can just take the lock line and you can lift it all the way up, drill here and here, and then bring it back down where it belongs. But if you don't do the anti-siphon holes, you're likely going to have a flood. And the best thing to know about working with plumbing like this is to unplug your return pump and see what happens while you're standing in front of the tank so you don't get surprises later when you come home. So simulate a power outage. Unplug the return pump, turn off your protein skimmer because the body of the skimmer's got water in it too, and watch your sump. And if your sump comes dangerously close to overflowing, plug it back in again, get the water back in the tank, and make some adjustments. Or drain some water out of the sump, fix the plumbing, and redo the test until you know for a fact your sump can hold all the water. Okay, I also wanted to talk about gyres and vortex. So personally, I only beta tested the gyre. I didn't use the gyre long term. Again, for me, it was the eyesore thing. It was one more thing in my tank I didn't want to look at. And the smaller the footprint of any kind of flow generator, the better. You know, if we could have invisible ones, I'd be super happy. But the gyre itself can be used horizontally or it can be used vertically. And I believe, unless I'm incorrect in what I've learned, that you can have one going this way and you could have one going this way because there's 2 blades. And so you can actually pick which direction you want the water to flow to choose a path that is ideal for your corals. Another trick that some people do is if their tank has that glass Euro brace or a cross brace, they will mount the gyre from the magnet on top of the glass and then have the gyre hanging down underneath, moving water this way or that way through the tank. And that's another way to kind of reduce the footprint of the gyre. But if it's sucking in air, that's not going to work. You might be able to create or fabricate an acrylic bracket to bring it down another inch or so, and that might solve it. And like I said, you could still secure it in the top above the glass, and that way it looks nicer to your eye, and it won't be blocking your view. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And then finally, that's as much as I know about gyre. I mean, I really don't have a lot of personal experience with it because I tried it like years ago. The Vortec pumps I have, I don't know, 13 years experience with. I love the Vortec pumps. They cost a lot and they're worth every penny. And there's people out there that will say, oh, what a waste of money. Only the elite buy them. Tons of people buy them. Some people buy them used. Some people buy them new. The ones on this tank are the same motors that I used in 2011. This is the MP60. It's really large. It moves a lot of water. It's designed for a tank 1 inch thick or less. And the motor sits on the outside, which you might be able to see on the right there on the back side. There's a motor there. But this is the wet side. This is the part inside the tank. And water sucks in through the basket, and then it comes out through the front. So in this situation here, I have flow coming from the middle of my tank, and it's moving this way. And it's actually hitting this coral. This coral is like a big wall now. So, if anything, I need to cut it. But this is blowing water out, and it's sucking water in from above and from beneath. And so it's got an ebb and it's got a flow. And any kind of powerhead will have some type of ebb or flow, but I've noticed it very specifically with the Vortec because it really draws in a lot of water to move a lot of water. And in my tank, the tank is 7 feet long, and that pump right there moves the water really well to about here, and I can still feel it over here, but at this point it was too far away. And so that's why I added a Vortec back there, right there, that pushes water forward to create some flow in this area because these LPS corals were not moving enough and the Gorgonian wasn't moving enough. And that Vortec there takes care of this dead zone. And then my additional flow comes from the RFGs here, pushing water that direction. So I've got water moving in the midpoint. I've got return water coming across the top and heading toward the overflow box. But when I throw food in the tank, food doesn't just go right out the teeth. It actually goes toward that direction, and then the Vortex sucks it down and blows the food back. So if I'm using something like melevsreef and I'm broadcast feeding, I can actually watch the food, I can watch the cloud move and then pump down and fill until everything is uniform, one giant cloud. I really like the Vortex because they're easy to clean. If something breaks, the warranty is fantastic. Ecotech's product customer service is excellent. And anything you need, like let's say you somehow broke the front of your screen of your Vortec, you can order this piece. You can order this piece. You can order the magnet. You can order the entire assembly as one piece. It'll cost a lot of money. I believe this one is $100 for just this piece right here. But like I said, I've had mine for 9 years. Well, yeah, it's coming up on 9 years. And it's running 365 days a year. They're never off except when I clean them. So why do I have one of these in my hand if my tank is running? I bought one extra one, and what I can do is I can put this one in a solution to clean it. Or I'm sorry, I can put a dirty one in solution to clean it and pop this one in my tank and keep the flow going instead of waiting for a pump to get cleaned. So I always keep circulation in my tank. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that pertains to flow in the tank is the fact that sometimes people make arbitrary decisions about flow that make no sense whatsoever. They just chose it out of the blue. They had no rhyme or reason. They just did it. And I've never understood that thought process. And I still can't understand it. But someone will get something, let's just say the Vortec, just out of ease and convenience. And in the Vortec, you can use EcoSmart Live, or nowadays we have Mobius coming out. You can choose the gallons per hour that is moving. Or maybe in other countries it's the liters per hour, I don't know. But they're choosing a certain amount of flow that, let's just call it 33% or 28%. And I'm always astounded to hear these low numbers, like why would you run it at 28%? And their answer is, I don't know, I just picked it. Well, that's the one thing I want you to overcome. Overcome the desire to go with a low number if it's unnecessary. If there's an absolute need for this, I get it, but have a good reason. Most things that we plug in, like your blender, when you're blending ice, it's one speed, you blend. Now there's some other options on these blenders these days. There's mix, there's chop, there's it, there's that. You do have the ability to change it, but blend is blend. And in our tanks, in the old days, you got a MaxiJet, you just plugged it in and it was on, or you unplugged it and it was off. And you got all the flow or you got none of it. And these days, with all this control we can have less flow, but I don't know why people are doing less flow. That's the part I can't seem to get. I can't seem to figure out a way for, no one's justifying why they've picked such a slow number. And this also pertains to how fast the pump is churning the water in your protein skimmer, how fast the water is returning to your tank. Yes, you have the ability to dial it down, but why are you dialing it down? Is there a reason? Because most of our corals need a lot of flow, and they love chaotic flow like I talked about before. And when we run our tanks in lagoon mode at a very low flow rate, there has to be a good reason. Like, for example, I'm feeding my coral and the pump blows it off the coral and the coral didn't get anything to eat. Fair enough, you need slow flow at that point. Makes sense. But if you leave it at that low flow all the time, and then you're seeing cyanobacteria in the bottom of your tank, and you're thinking, where did this come from? Probably from the lack of flow in your display. So I'm encouraging you, when you're hooking up pumps to your tank, maybe start at 50% and then go up higher until you find that sweet spot. If you use 100% of the pump, there's a chance it's too much flow and the water's cavitating bubbles, the coral is blown off the skeleton, the skin is coming off the SPS. It's too much flow. But corals need flow. They need it for a number of reasons. They not only use it to catch food, they also use it to clean themselves. The flow moving off of them or across them allows them to shed stuff and get it in the water column and get it off of themselves so they can feel and be clean, to be able to breathe, to be able to photosynthesize through their zooxanthellae. All these things are happening. That's why flow is so important, and why we talk about the need for flow in a tank is because we need to take care of the needs of the coral rather than I picked this number because I like it. That just makes no sense. It should not be I was in a mood. And I told the story once before, but not every one of you is the same listener, so I'll bring it up again. I had a friend whose tank was getting really, really cold, and we couldn't figure out why, because he had all the right gear, he had battery backups, he had heaters, and what he had done is he had chosen arbitrarily to slow the return pump down to like 35% at night, and then he would bring it up to like 65 or 70% during the daytime. So for about 4 hours a day, the tank was nice and warm, and then the temperature just dropped like a rock on the thermometer until the next day when the return pump was really going, and then it started to bring the temperature up because the heaters were in the sump, and the water was moving so slowly through the sump, the heat never got to the tank in time before the tank wouldn't get the warmth. And so the tank got too cold. And I was looking at his graphs in the apex, and I said, what is going on? Why is your tank cold for 15 hours a day or something? And he says, I don't know. And I said, well, tell me, you're using the same return pump, right? And he's like, yeah, but I have it variable speed. And I was like, why? And he didn't have an answer. And that's just because he didn't really think it through. And with me, it's all about logistics. For me, I want a return pump that just runs. And I want to run all the time, same speed, move the water, get the water up, bring the water down. Get the water up, bring the water down. And that's what I want. And that's what gives you that consistency in your tank. If you slow anything down, it can affect tank temperature, it can affect coral health, and if you speed it up too fast, yeah, you're going to see bubbles. But keep in mind, anything brand new you put in your tank, brand new, like just opened up a maxi jet and hooked it up, you might see bubbles on the body of it, you might see it blowing some bubbles out. Usually takes about 14 days for things to slime up and get a little dirty internally. And then you should just get nice, clean water flowing out without the bubbles to distract you. So if you slow down the flow because the bubbles are bothering you, if it's a brand new product, I would just say ignore the bubbles from now. If you're still getting them after 14 days, fair enough, you might need to make a change. But bubbles are not evil in a tank, they're just a visual imperfection that we don't appreciate. You don't see bubbles blowing around in my tank for a reason. But when I first hooked up the plumbing and first added water, yeah, there was bubbles blowing around, and I just had to tolerate it for a couple of weeks. Okay, I think that was everything I want to talk about tank and the flow. So let's move down to the sump area, because that's another important area where flow matters. Now, we need a certain amount of flow to go through every zone of your sump. And a lot of sumps are built where the water drains in and goes maybe into a filter sock, protein skimmer section, goes to a refugium, goes to a return zone. And that one, pretty much, the return pump dictates how much water is going to move through the sump. So if you have a mag pump, or you have an octo pump, or you have a quantum pump, or a red dragon, whatever brand you have, if it's a 500 gallon an hour pump, and I'm just picking a number out of the air, and most people would want faster, and you push it up through plumbing, and through elbows, and through unions, and through PVC pipe, and through lock line, and through a nozzle, you might only be getting 200 gallons an hour. So let's just pretend you went from 500 down to 200, and you got 200 gallons an hour going into the tank and moving into the tank. You have all these pumps moving water in the display, but this is your return water, okay? This has nothing to do with flow in the tank. This is just getting water back up to the tank, and that's how it's supposed to be. If it's going up at 200 gallons an hour, it's draining at 200 gallons an hour. It's not going to ever drain faster than what can get into the tank because it's equilibrium. You're getting a certain amount of balanced water movement. So water's going up and coming down, and it just goes in a circle forever until you take the return pump off for maintenance. If you said, well, look, I don't want 200 gallons an hour, I want 1,000 gallons an hour coming out of my plumbing, you would need to go to some kind of a plumbing calculator. You'd have to input all the lengths of pipe, like I have 15 inches of 1-inch pipe, and then I have 8 inches of 1-inch pipe, and then I have 6 inches of 1-inch pipe, and then I have 24 inches of 3/4-inch pipe inside the overflow box, and then I have an elbow here, a union here, an elbow here, a union here, and then I have 3/4-inch lock line, and I have this nozzle. It will tell you, okay, if you had 1,000 gallons an hour, you're going to come out at 850 or 825 or something. And if you were trying to get a higher number, you'd have to go to a pump that maybe moves 12 or 1,300 gallons an hour to get the 1,000 gallons an hour out of the nozzle. But why are you trying to get 1,000 gallons of water to move through your plumbing is the question. Because you just need enough water to get up to the tank to bring the heat and the clean water up and drain the dirty or raw water back down. So normally we're looking at a flow rate from the sump to the tank to be between 3 and 5 times the display's size. So if you have a 100-gallon tank, you might want 300 to 500 gallons an hour moving down the drain, being filtered, and coming back up. And that's a slow flow. You're not gonna. It's not fast. It's not noisy. The faster you push water up, the noisier the drains can become, and oftentimes do. And so people do different plumbing scenarios to quiet it down because it bothers them. Or they put lids on the sump, or they put the sump in the basement so they don't have to hear it at all. That's okay. None of that's wrong. It's just a matter of how much flow is moving through the sump. Now, if you have water go through the compartments too quickly, the filtration can't do its job adequately, especially if the sump is small. Because if you are moving 1,000 gallons an hour through a small sump, you're slingshotting the water through zones really fast. You oftentimes will see bubbles appear, and bubbles appear in the display tank coming out of the nozzle of the return. And you are bypassing the protein skimmer, you are shooting past the baffles, maybe even going over the baffles instead of under them, because the water's so fast, it's elevated and cascading through the zones. So you do want the right amount of flow through your sump, and it doesn't have to be fast. You also you could borrow water from the return pump to feed reactors, which we would call a manifold. So you've got this plumbing line that's going up to the tank, and then you put a T and you put a long piece of pipe with several fittings on there, and each has a valve, and you're borrowing some water to feed a GFO reactor, a carbon reactor, a biopellet reactor. Well, for every 100 gallons an hour you steal for a reactor, you're taking away from the return pump. So if the return pump is 1,300 gallons an hour, and you've given away 500 or 600 to the reactors, you might only have 800 gallons going up. So you do want to keep that in mind, that your flow rate will be dictated by all the different outlets. And the more you add, the more nozzles you have coming out, the weaker the flow will be out of each one. So you want to keep that in mind. Personally, I like to have one return pump that's just on. I like to have a second pump that is for the manifold to feed the reactors. So if I need to work on the reactors, I can turn off that pump or close the valves and work on the reactor. And the return pump's still doing its job, and the tank doesn't even know what I'm doing underneath in the sump. So that's my recommendation there. Now, if there's a power outage, and I mention this a lot because it happens a lot to a lot of people. If there's a power outage, the number one flow you want is your return pump running. It's the best choice you can have. And the reason for that is that will move all the water through the tank, through the overflow boxes, through the socks, through the skimmer section, through the refugium, through the return pump, and back up. Nothing is stagnant, everything is moving. The only places water won't move would be inside reactors, especially if they're on a manifold, or they have their own little MaxiJet feed pumps feeding those individual pumps, and there's a power outage. So how do you get the return pump to run? It depends on the size of the return pump and how big your battery backup is. Some people buy the APC 1500, and they might get 2 or 3 hours, or maybe even 5 hours, depending on the size of the pump. I seem to remember having a Mag 5, or maybe it was a Mag 7, which is 700 gallons an hour, hooked up to my 29-gallon aquarium, and I think I was able to get 5.5 hours out of it. And that would allow the water to drain into my sump and then come back up, and it made sure there was oxygen for the entire system the entire time the power outage was going on. But if it went past that and the battery backup finally dried up and had no more juice left, the tank sat there stagnant until the power came back on, which is one of the reasons I recommend you own a generator that you can plug your stuff into. And so whether you're using a battery backup or using a generator, starting the return pump first is my #1 priority because it moves all the water. If you can't do that, if you don't have the room, you're not allowed to have a generator, you have to use battery backups, you can buy a series of deep cycle batteries and you can create this battery bank, sort of like your own DIY Tesla, and you can create an area where you can plug in air pumps with air stones. You need to use weighted air stones though, because a regular air stone will float at the surface and just bubble at the surface and do very little for the tank. But if you have a heavy ceramic air stone that's dangling low in the tank, it will add air bubbles into the tank to help the fish live. However, all the water sitting in the overflow boxes is stagnant. All the water in the sump is stagnant. All the water in the reactors is stagnant. And then when the power finally comes on, all that stagnant water gets flushed into your tank and you could start losing livestock, which is why I'm saying it's so important to get the return pump going to keep everything moving no matter what. But if you can't and you have to do air stones, then what I recommend is going to be some manual effort on your part. Like scoop some water out of the sump once an hour and pour it in the display tank. Like if you can fit a 1-gallon pitcher, for example, you scoop out a gallon, you pour it in the tank, it drains down into the sump. And every hour you do that. And by doing that, you're dumping some fresh oxygenated water into the sump and the overflow box, and everything is safe. If you have an extended power outage and all your reactors have been offline, just drain the reactors entirely. Clean them up if you want, if you don't, whatever. But just drain them, throw away that water, and put new salt water to replace what was sitting stagnant. And that includes emptying your overflow boxes too. Drain the overflow boxes into a bucket, or siphon it out into a bucket, or however you have to get rid of the water so that stagnant water doesn't go back into your tank and hurt your livestock. So you see, flow really matters. It's a really important topic. Oh, there's another trick you can do. Remember at the beginning of this discussion, I talked about how they used to use the under gravel filter with the riser pipes. You can do the same thing with a PVC. This is going to be something you're going to rig. Okay, it's not going to look good, but it's for those emergencies. You can take a PVC pipe that, let's say it's 1 inch in diameter, or 1.5, whatever that air stone fits, and you can even cut it at a 45 at the bottom and have it go up, and then put an elbow at the top, and you'll drill a hole, and you're going to run the airline tubing through the hole down into there, and you can have the air stone right here. So as the air pump is pushing water into the air stone, it's creating bubbles, and the bubbles are rising up that pipe and pouring out the elbow. You're actually sucking water in and moving it through the tank. So that's even better than just an air stone floating in the tank, is to actually suck the bottom of the water up and send it to create some poor man's flow in the display tank for emergencies. And you can build these emergency risers and just have them ready. And then the day the power goes out, you get your risers out, you get your battery-powered air pumps out, you get your ceramic air stones installed, and you get things going. And you can, try this out, during a normal day when the power is going to see how it works. And then, I'm not saying put your tank through a power outage. I'm just saying turn off some pumps, try it out, and look for yourself and see what it does. And then if you have to make any tweaks or you have to figure out a way to affix the riser pipe so it stays where it belongs, you can kind of prep so the day that you really need it, you'll know what to do and how it's done and keep your livestock healthy. So that's the cheapest flow, is riser pipes. And it's not pretty, but it does the job. And in an emergency, pretty usually doesn't matter. Okay, I think that's everything. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions about this, and I'm happy to answer them. I want to get into all of your questions now and hear about your presents that you got. And if there's something I forgot to mention, and I see it in your comments, I'll bring it up now. So let me start to do that. Other than that, I thank you guys for listening through this. That was a long one. 280 of us are here today. So awesome. That's great. They're all here for the last live stream of the year. All right, let me scroll way up and do a real quick read over. Oh, sea swirl. See, that was on my list. I didn't mention it. Okay, so a sea swirl is a motor that has to be above the water. So it would be way up here. And they come in different sizes. They're relatively expensive. I mean, like the motor itself, I think is like $450, $550. And then you have your plumbing, your return line goes into the top of the sea swirl. It goes down through the sea swirl, and the sea swirl is a motor that will pivot. And you can tell it, I want to go 90 degrees, I want to go 180 degrees. And what happens is, I'm just going to use this as an example. This is the bottom of the sea swirl, and so your nozzle is turning back and forth. And it turns slowly. It's not a fast turn. It just does this thing very gradually over 30 seconds, and it finally gets over to the other side. I mean, I'm going still too fast. It's even slower than this. And it's still going and going. You just barely perceptibly see it moving and moving and moving. And then it finally hits the stopping point that you've predetermined, and then it starts to go back again the other direction. And sea swirls are used in public aquariums. There's hobbyists that use them. They used to be very popular, especially with closed loop application, because you could have your closed loop go through a sea swirl and have the nozzle move the water back and forth to your tank. So you don't have constant flow going one direction. Now you got flow going this way, and 10 seconds from now you got flow going this way, and 10 seconds from now you got flow going this way. So it's a nice application if you have the room for it. Now the motor has to be dry at all times. They do have a warranty. When they break, all that does is it means your lock line no longer moves. Wherever it's stopped, and you're gonna have to fix it. But it's not going to suddenly not let water go through it because it's broken. So that's just something to know for the day that it happens. Thank you, Ryan, for bringing that up. I appreciate that. All right. I'm gonna give you guys something to look at while I'm looking at questions. So I'll move this down a little bit. Eric Schlicht says, have you tested a gyro pump? I was doing the beta testing when they first were coming to market, and I used one for a few months in my 400 gallon. Thank you, Harkins Aquatics. I appreciate that. Yeah, so it fits a Jabo pump. Gotcha. I didn't know that was a clone. I just thought it was a similar pump. Clone makes sense. All right. Carlos asked me this. What do I think of the eCoral Pro Kit? I'm aware of the eCoral controller. I saw it about a year and a half ago. It was still they were working out the kinks, but I don't know anything further. Sorry, Carlos. Michael Wells got an Achilles tang for Christmas. Congratulations, man. That's one of the fish I've always wanted. The silent one says, Photoshop. Any real photographer uses it. Yes, I do too. I use Lightroom or Photoshop. I even have a video of how I use Lightroom on this channel if you're curious to see it, because it makes pictures look better. But using the right gear in the ocean is really important. Let's see. Oh, I had someone ask me if I was willing to put Linzer Torta on my website where you could order it. No, I'm not going to do that. Let's see. Eric, if you are friends with me, my personal page on Facebook, it's in the notes section of my Facebook page. I don't even know if Eric's even still here. So I'm catching up on this old, all this chat from earlier. ATF in the house asks if Mark is open to taking any custom acrylic orders. Yes, I am back to working with acrylic again now that my mom has left town. Oh, I didn't mention the Tunzi pumps either for another tank, a pump that is used in flow. Let me talk about that for a minute. So Tunzi came out with a pump years ago They had, basically it looked like a supersized maxi jet. And then they converted it and they called it the Turbelle. No, I'm saying it wrong. I think Turbelle was what they first had. And then they changed it into some kind of a stream pump, and you had to like change two pieces and change the impeller like I did in that maxi jet and create a flow pump. And so I had one of those in my 55-gallon aquarium, and I had only that plugged into my UPS. So if the power went out, I had something crazy like, I think it was 8 hours of flow through the tank. But all the water in the sump would be stagnant, which is the thing I was talking about before. But at least I had that water moving. So my 29-gallon had a UPS that kept the return pump going, and my 55-gallon had the Turbelle to move water through the 55-gallon and keep the corals alive. But eventually something had to be solved in what's going on in the sump. But those were the couple of pumps. And I did use tonsy pumps in my 280 for a couple of years. And then when the Vortex came out, the Tunsies came out and the Vortex went in. And I was so happy because the Tunsy was a really big thing in the tank. And the Vortex was half of it. You know, it was a wet side. The motor's outside the tank, which essentially is invisible to me. I don't see it. I see what's going on in the tank. I'm always looking at the contents of the tank. I'm not looking at the outside unless it's time for maintenance. But Tunsi is another brand of a lot of pumps. And they made these ones that kind of look like a round ball with a nozzle on the end, kind of like a turned on Death Star. I'm sure they're going to appreciate that. So, and I didn't really talk about Jabo pumps. I'm not a huge fan of theirs, only because they don't last long term. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I know everyone affords what they can afford, but when Jabo came out, they hit the market and people went crazy. And you know, like one guy in our club decided to do what was called a group buy, where he buys for a lot of people, and then they come to him to pick up, or he delivers to their house. And he started off with like 40 of those things, and I swear at one point I think he was up to like 200 pumps were all coming in from China, and he received all these pumps, and people were buying 2 and 3 at a time because they were so cheap. They said, rather than buying a new one, I'll just buy an extra one of these so when it breaks I've got a backup. But they broke a lot, and people were replacing them with their backups. And there will always have some people out there that will say, oh, I've had my Jabo for 3 years, it's been amazing. I'm like, all right. But there's plenty that said it didn't last 12 months. And I know some people that reached in their tank and got shocked because the pump got them. So sometimes electricity leaks too. It's another reason to be aware of what you're buying. Okay, I'm going to put you guys back over here while I look at... I'd like to move this a little closer, but it was doing something weird with the camera, so let's see what happens. It's almost like an interference was happening. Okay, this looks good. Sorry about the lights reflecting off the glass. Let me see if I can tilt this down a little bit more. See, now it's doing that. That is so weird. It's acting like it's some kind of electrical interference by the tank, which has never been an issue before. Might have to replace that camera. All right. Oh, absolutely, Mina. Thank you for sharing that story with me. I really appreciate it. And I wish you luck on your new tank. All right. Odile, thank you very much, or Odile. I remember you told me how to say that. Now I forgot what you said. Said, bring your computer up higher so you don't have to look down. My computer actually is up. I've got the posture right. I'm just broken inside. And someone has to go in and carve it all out and fix me. Oh, you know what I didn't talk about? All right, we got another thing to talk about. So I mentioned it, but I didn't get into it. Wave. So, for example, Tunzi came out with a wave box, which took one of their, I think it was a Turbelle, and they put it inside, and there was a box around it, and water would be in the box, and the pump would, you know, push out a blast of water, which would, water would go into the box, and it would put another blast, and it was pulsed these blasts out one after another, and after a minute or two, you start to see the wave action. And you'd have soft corals doing this back and forth, and gorgonians are doing this, and zoanthids were doing this, and polyps on SPS were waving back and forth slightly. It was really cool. But you had this big box in the corner of your tank, and some people had a box in the front and a box in the back, so there was plenty of this wave action. Others put one on this side and one on this side, and they'd even run them anti-sync to where it was back and forth. Vortec came out and they included the option for wave mode. I remember when wave action was an option, the first thing that we realized was that there was a chance that this rocking of the aquarium could make the silicone let go. And the companies were even saying things like, you might reduce the age of your tank by 20%. So if you are planning to use that aquarium for 10 years, you might only get it for 8 because of wave action. So, I mean, it's just something to keep in mind. You know, you can't just ignore it and say, well, I disagree. It's like the tank is literally moving on the stand a little bit because of the wave action, because the water isn't moving. There's a chance silicone won't last as long as it would with a nice, stationary, steady tank. Okay. Having wave mode in your tank can be appealing. The downside normally is when someone chooses wave mode is their motor has to spin up and slow down and spin up and slow down. And you hear this all the time. So for me, I like to have a constant sound on my pumps where it's sort of like the computer fan on the back of your computer. It just blows and you're aware that the computer is on, but it doesn't bother you per se. And I've actually never intentionally chosen wave mode for any of my tanks, even though I've had the option in my Vortex since 2006. So if you want wave mode, there's nothing wrong with it, and you can definitely do it. It just depends on your auditory sensitivity, as well as do you like the look of that, plus the slight chance your tank may not last as long. Those are some things to consider. All right. So thanks for bringing up wave mode. Oh, I posted a picture on Instagram of the citric acid I used to clean my skimmer recently. So some of you were asking, what did you use? What did you buy? So I wanted you guys to see it. So it's on Instagram, and that, of course, went over to my Facebook page, too. So if you're following me in either of those pages, you'll see the product. It's something I bought from Amazon. Whiskey Clown says, what brand of pump is that from Marineland? This is just called their MaxiJet. Let me switch camera here. So it just says MaxiJet right there. And this is a Model 900. There's 400, 600, 900, 1200. Normally I buy 1200s. I believe this 900 was a prize from going to Macna. And I have 2 of them, never used. But if I used them, it was like to demonstrate something like today. But they haven't been used in the water because I haven't needed them because my other MaxiJets still work. So they're sort of like a backup pump. But Cobalt has a good brand of them. I mean, to be honest, I feel like it's the same. You know, just a slightly different package. But someone recently told me, oh, I heard Cobalts are better. Well, MaxiJets last forever, so I don't know how you can beat that. But that is the brand that's on my website because I do carry Cobalt products when I remember to order. And when I tried to order more, they were completely out of stock. But I reached out to the president of the company, and he told me, yes, more is coming in early January. So I will replenish, and they'll be in stock. And if you guys need any, I'm happy to sell them to you. All right. Marty Ness, I guess that's how you say that, says that vinegar is bad for plastics. Well, a lot of us have been using vinegar for many years to clean our pumps and clean impellers, clean aquariums. And I mean, if you leave it in pure vinegar for days on end, magnets can swell and even rupture in pure vinegar. But if you're just doing a soaking overnight or you're doing a scrubbing in the sink with vinegar, that's not going to hurt your plastics. I've put way more expensive pumps in muriatic acid without even thinking twice about it. I've never feared the risk of the acid. You may want to remove the O-ring from your pump before you put it in acid if you can take it apart. But otherwise, take the pump apart and get that thing out and get it rinsed in some water and set it aside. Because what happens, the longer it sits in vinegar or it sits in any kind of acid, it stretches and it becomes too large, and then we try and install it back in the pump. It won't fit because it's too big. And you have to wait a couple days for it to dry out and go back to its normal size, or replace it with a new one. But usually it's the rubber that takes the hit on the acids, not the plastic. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have plastic. What am I saying? We definitely can clean with vinegar. Don't fear that. And yes, you can clean plastics. You can clean your, my feeding clips that I use to hold nori. You can put those in vinegar. The cleaning magnets I use to scrub the glass, the inside part usually gets a bunch of stuff on the back. I float that in vinegar and water. I like 50-50, 50% water, 50% vinegar. But the citric acid thing, I have a huge vat of it. And there's another picture, like I said on Instagram, showing my other skimmers getting a bath right now while I, yeah, you can't see it. I have another Nio skimmer that's soaking right now in citric acid. Oh, and ATF mentions the Hydor brand. See, I told you I couldn't think of all the pumps. Hydor does have a whole line of pumps that you can use, and they have the deflectors on them as well, like ATF was saying. James asks a different question. My fish got wiped out by marine velvet. How long should it go fallow before introducing more fish? 3 months would be the most I'd wait. So 8 weeks, 12 weeks. 12 weeks is smart. I would go 3 months. 3 months fallow. You can still enjoy your corals. You can feed your invertebrates. But don't put any fish in there for 3 solid months. And then your new fish should be through quarantine and or safety stop before you put them in the tank. And hopefully you won't run into velvet again. Daniel, we've already hit the orders. But you can still enter the contest. We're at 1,062 orders right now. So we did it. Thank you guys so much for participating. Marcus said that he had a 6-line wrasse get sucked to the side of a protective cap on the MaxiJet. You know what? I pretty much guarantee you that almost everyone on this channel has had some kind of fish sucked up against some kind of pump, or even sucked up against the teeth of the overflow box. I've seen clownfish that are like against there, and I'm like, oh my God, you poor thing. And I'll go up there to remove it, and the fish just swims right back down. I'm like, really? You're just messing with me now? You're just, look, I'm dying, I'm dying. Aha, just kidding, psych. And they swim back down. But there are times where you'll find a tang, or you'll find a copper band, or you'll find a wrasse is sucked against a pump, and you're like, how is that even possible? More often than not, it's not the pump's fault. The fish was already weak or sick, halfway dying, and it got near the pump, and that was it. And it just sucked in and held on to it. And that's it. But I just don't actively see pumps eating fish. I think fish just get too close, and sometimes they get themselves in a pickle, and they just do something dumb. Just like we sometimes do something dumb as well. Speaking of pumps and vortex, you guys saw my red starfish. A lot of people are like, oh my God, that red starfish is gorgeous. I've never seen that color. I've had it for many years, and I've had these vortex for many years as well. And one day I was watching a movie. I'm here in the living room. The tank is pitch dark. It's night, and I'm just enjoying my movie. It's midnight or whatever, and I hear thunk. I'm like, what is that sound? So I went to my tank, and I grabbed my flashlight, and I'm looking, and this part was down on the sand. And I thought, well, that's weird. Why would it just let go? And why did I hear thunk? But when I looked inside the cage, I saw something red wrapped around the impeller. And I was like, what the heck is that red thing? And then I took the flashlight and I went across the sand, and I saw that starfish that only had 4 legs now crawling as fast as it could the opposite direction away from the vortex. And I felt so bad for it. It's like, aw, it got an arm lopped off, and I had to take this out of the water, remove the cage, untwist the arm, put the cage back on, and put it back in the tank and turn it on. And I felt bad for the starfish. The starfish, I'm sure, felt bad too, and went deep into the rockwork where I didn't see it for a long time. But then one day I saw it, and it had these long, beautiful red arms, and it had this little nub coming out. And it was kind of hideous. I think it was the stump and then like a little point that was about 1 inch long. And I was like, oh, it's growing its arm back. That is so sweet. Like a salamander grows a new tail. So it took a long time, and at one point, I don't know, a year later, I was like, look, it's completely back to its happy self again. That is so great. I'm so happy. And it learned its lesson. It'll never do that again. And I swear it was like a few months later, I heard a sound and it cut off another arm. I was like, are you kidding me? Didn't you suffer long enough the first time? And it was down to 4 legs again, and or arms or whatever they're called. And the starfish healed. And you see it now, it's beautiful. And I haven't seen it near the vortex in a while. So hopefully after 2 arms it's learned its lesson, but maybe starfish are reckless, crazy, I was trying to think of the motorcycle guy that jumps, the insane jumps. Anyway, maybe that's just a crazy starfish. But it's doing well, it's beautiful, I'm very happy I have it. And I shared a little video of it today if you want to see it moving. So instead of just a picture. All right, back to the tank. Garrett says, what model MaxiJet do you use to vacuum the vacuum nozzle from VCA with? I use the MaxiJet 1200. Look, it's doing it. That camera's just dying. I think we're going to have to give up on this camera and get a new one. The MaxiJet 1200 is great. It's just enough vacuum. I've used 900. I've used 600. It will still do the job, but I think I kind of like 1200 better. And I used it the other day when I cleaned out that skimmer really well. I took out the stand. I have this 1-inch stand that goes under the skimmer. And I scrubbed that in the acid as well. And then I used the vacuum and I vacuumed out everything around the clearacy and under the skimmer and got as much detritus out as I could. And it worked just great. I mean, I just love it. I love that attachment. I sell those on my website. They're in the plumbing section of the shop. And they're $10 for that piece. And you just put it onto a MaxiJet. And whether it's Cobalt or Marineland, it doesn't matter. It fits right on there. So use it. It's great. It's a great way to keep your sump clean. Tim says, now that you have an algae scrubber, have you thought about getting rid of the caulerpa and get some pretty macroalgae like dragon's breath, etc. for the refuge? I haven't thought about that yet. I even talked about if for some reason my entire refugium dies because there's a lack of nutrients in the water, that I might do something crazy like fill it up with a whole bunch of sand and garden eels, because that would be really, really cool. But another thing I could possibly do is keep it shallow and, like you said, put in some pretty macroalgae, and then maybe put some seahorses down there, something that has no competition that I can feed, or put sun corals and seahorses down there where I can feed the sun corals and the seahorses get food, or pipefish, or something, I don't know, something fun. I've actually recently kind of had a hankering to get some the electric flame scallops. I shared that video with you guys on Facebook. That was really interesting. If you didn't see the video, go to this page and scroll through the posts and you'll see a really good movie that was made for Wired magazine. It's like 12 minutes long on YouTube. And this video showed how a mantis shrimp, a peacock mantis shrimp, decided not to destroy a clam because the clam's electric movement through its mantle hypnotized it. And the shrimp just stood there and didn't move for like 15 minutes, according to the researcher. How cool is that? Because, we always wonder why things do certain things. And this clam decided to show the flashing beam to the mantis shrimp instead of swimming away for its life, and the mantis shrimp didn't hurt it. It was a really cool story. And then it made me think, oh, I want a flame scallop now. But flame scallops oftentimes don't do well in our tanks. And I'm wondering if maybe these days, now that we're feeding things like Bennereef to our tanks, if maybe flame scallops could live longer in captivity. So I'm kind of on the fence, but I was thinking that'd be kind of a cool one to get. And flame scallops are so beautiful. And what if my refugium area had like 15 of those? That would be cool. Oh, wow. Here's something from a blast from the past. So Stephen Hess says that his most basic tank had the squid with lockline nozzles in each end. And the squid was this plastic device that your water would flow in the bottom and it had a nozzle on each side and water would come out. You hook it up to plumbing. And inside were gears. And so as the water flowed through it, something was happening inside, like the components of your watch. and it would make water come out one side, and then the gears would turn, and then water come out the other side. And you couldn't take it apart to clean it. The original one you couldn't. The bigger one I think had an access door because they sometimes got jammed. And you would switch your flow back and forth with a squid. It was a really neat little gizmo that someone came up with. And you know, these days, now they're on 3D print stuff, I'm surprised no one has come up with a newer version of the squid where they print all their gears and they make their own little housing. That would be kind of a cool thing to see these days. And it's so long ago, I don't know. Here I'm recommending, you know, someone do something. I don't know where the patents are on that thing, but that was a neat little gizmo. I had one on my 29 gallon. I loved it. K. Miller says, should you ripple the top of the water in your refugium as well? I prefer to do that, again, so the surface stays nice and clean. The way mine is plumbed right now, it doesn't have that ability because my water comes in so low that the water kind of, I mean, it's flowing off the top, but I think if I were to look at the underside of the water, it might have a skin on it. I actually go through my refugium about once a week with a net, and I scoop off the surface and I kind of clean up the walls and push the plants down to create some over the plants flow to kind of improve that. You'd have to look at your circumstances and how your refugium is doing to see if it needs anything additional. I've always kind of thought, wouldn't it be neat if you could put some kind of a closed loop on the refugium to create a little bit more flow in that compartment without having to add more water to it. The problem is the water has to suck into the pump to push water in, and the plants could get sucked in. So it's kind of a challenge to create that additional flow in the refugium zone without obstructing the pump accidentally with plant life. Claudia says, are you planning on going bigger when it comes to replacing the tank someday? No, this is as big as it gets. The only thing I could imagine doing, and as I've mentioned once before, or a few times before, if I did a new tank and I could put it down on the floor, I'd make it taller so I could enjoy the view from above for a longer period of time. But not more than 4 feet tall. I love the idea of it being down on the floor. Brian asks, I'm going to be building a 140-gallon tank. What's a good skimmer for that size tank? Well, I'm a huge Nios proponent. I love the Nios protein skimmers. But Octo is another good brand that's been out now for a couple of years. I used to use Reef Octopus, but it was a little too noisy for me, for my taste. Another brand is Aquamax from Marine Depot. They have a line of skimmers. You're going to want to look at something that's rated for about 175 gallons. Maybe 200 gallons to match your tank size. We don't have to oversize skimmers like we did in the old days. So, you know, something rated for like 175 gallons, 200 gallons would be my suggestion. And, you know, read the reviews, read the comments by the users. You're looking for something that is quiet and efficient and easy to clean and has a warranty. So you can replace the pump if it fails. Oh boy. Sovsborg says, I accidentally left my RO-DI running and it dropped the salinity down to 0 and wiped out everything in the tank. Boy, are my arms tired. That is awful news. I highly urge you never to hook up an RO-DI system directly to your tank, ever, for this exact scenario. When RO-DI is running nonstop, if it's 100 gallons a day, that's 4 gallons every single hour until you notice. And in this case, you really didn't notice. It got down to 0. So, I mean, it completely changed it from a saltwater tank to a freshwater tank. So that's a complete reset. You know, all your bacteria is gone. The rock itself, the sand, it's all done. You know, you have to start from scratch. I always recommend you hook up an RO-DI system to a reservoir with a float valve. A barrel, a trash can, an acrylic box, you know, with a float. That way when it's full, the float rises, no more water can come out and your floor stays dry. And your RO system may try to turn on and off. You know, it'll kind of like come to life and turn off. It'll shutter to life and turn off because it's still bleeding a few drops of water past the float valve. Because all a float valve is a rubber flapper with a float. And when it comes up, it pushes the flapper against the hole with a float creating tension. And it's it's rubber over the end of water coming out. Well, you've got water coming from the city that's 40 to 60 psi, comes out of the RODI system, and it's pushing, let's say 40 psi against that rubber flapper, and it's just rubber laying over the surface. That's all it is, with a little tension from a float. So a little bit of water bleeds past, which makes the unit come back on, which sends water down your waistline the entire time, and then it shutters off and no water's going down the waist, and then a few more drops and it shutters on and sends water down the waistline. It's destroying your membrane, it's wasting water down the waistline, and it's adding more water to the float. So I always recommend use a float to remind, to kind of keep your floor dry, but as soon as you see it's full or almost full, turn off the system or close a ball valve so no more water can come out of the tubing. Because a ball valve stops the water from moving, where the float valve just slows it down. Just like you being outside washing your car and you put your thumb over the end of a garden hose to stop the water from coming out, that doesn't last. You hold it for, it holds for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, psst, a little bit of water gets past your thumb. Same principle with the float valve. I seriously urge you to change your setup, and I'm probably guessing you will after going through this scenario. So I'm really sorry you lost all your stuff. I didn't really dwell on it, but I also want you guys, I kind of mentioned it, but it might have been a little obscure in the conversation. When it comes to flow in your tank, it's also good if you can take, have one power head up high and one at the middle point, maybe one down low, depending on your setup. Some people don't want to put anything on the sides of the tank, like vortex or gyres or anything, because they view the tank from the sides and from the front. So in that case, they want to put it on the back of the tank shooting forward. And that's okay. You can put them kind of midpoint up on the back walls blowing forward, and they'll hit the front glass and ricochet off, and you can create some flow there. Plus you have your two returns pushing into the tank. I'm kind of thinking of a tank that's like 120 gallons to 150 gallons now. If it's a smaller tank like a 90 gallon or a 75, you can put power heads on the back if your tank isn't too close to the wall. If your tank is very close to the wall, you lack the space to put pumps back there. It just depends what you purchased. So keep those things in mind. Some power heads like Tunzi or Hydor may have just a thin, skinny magnet you put on the back side of the tank and put the actual motor on the inside against the back, blowing forward and kind of blending in with a black background, so they're essentially invisible. But having everything up high is probably not a good choice. I like to kind of have some up high and some down low. So you have to see what will work in your environment and what works best for your livestock. Gino says, my fish tend to not like heavy flow, it looks like. Well, it's not up to the fish. It's really, most cases is up to the corals. There are some fish that love to swim and have no, they can't get enough of it. Like the Achilles tang that someone got for Christmas earlier in this conversation, they will swim right in front of the power head like they're on a treadmill, and they're just swimming as hard as they can into that flow, and they're loving it. There's other fish that are getting blown around, or they'll swim in front and get blown into the tank. They also learn to not swim into that spot. They'll just find other areas where it's less intense. But it shouldn't be, oh, I saw an anthias get blown across, so I got to turn down my flow. Kind of watch your tank on a regular basis. And you'll probably notice that most of your fish are going to find those spots they like the most. They'll choose to swim up high, they'll choose to swim down low, they'll be inside a coral. But the flow is very important for all life. And even the oxygen levels in the water and the driving off of the CO2 is all part of flow. And the lack of it, the lack of oxygen exchange, is problematic for fish. So not enough flow can actually hurt your fish because there's just not enough oxygen exchange. So keep that in mind too. Trevor, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Tim says, with the large fish room, have you ever considered putting your sump somewhere open in the fish room so you can see access and access everything better? Plus, you're getting old. Hey! So a predator tank in the bottom may be interesting. My sump actually is visible from pretty much all four sides. And I have access from the front and the back specifically, but I can even get to the ends where I need to crawl under if needed. But to have it out in wide open, it's actually like right now I've got that trough in my fish room with the acid in it that I'm cleaning some pumps and stuff. It's in my way. I like to have room to walk. And that is something that I've noticed I'm getting more and more, because I'm getting so old, I'm getting more annoyed by the lack of walking space. If I go into a fish store and everything's in the way and you can't even get to the tanks because there's barrels in the way and carts in the way and jugs in the way, it bugs me. It's like, why aren't these main customer thoroughfares or pathways wide open for your shopping experience? The more crap in the way, the worse it is, and the more annoyed I get, and the less I want to spend money. So in my house, I like to have nice open areas. Matter of fact, if my house was 3 times the size, where I had lots of open space, I'd be super happy. I like space. So I wouldn't want to put a sump right in the middle of my room. I actually like it under the tank. But if I do the dream tank, you know, the new dream tank on the floor, the sump would have to be behind it, like you said, and I'd have access from 3 sides. That would be definitely interesting if I ever do that. I had one person say, "Oh, I'd hate cleaning the glass if it was down on the floor." It's a valid question, or a valid concern, but I think I'd survive it okay. I just love the access of having the ability to work on the tank from above and look down from above constantly, because it's so much better to look at your tank from above than it is from the side. Luke, the answer to your question is yes. He said, I'm setting up a new tank I got for Christmas. I'm using 2 Nero 5s and wonder if I could put them on the back of the aquarium and angle them toward the middle and still have good flow. Absolutely. You might even add more, but 2 is a good start for that size tank. Why did I say that? I thought this was for some reason I saw the size of the tank, but I don't know the size. But a couple of Nero 5s will do well. I've got one in my 60-gallon moving water, the full length, and it's doing really well, and it's probably around 75–80% flow. And on those things have a very skinny magnet, so they'll totally fit on the back of your tank. A trick you can use to put a magnet on the back of your tank to secure a pump would be either to use metal forceps, which look like giant tweezers, or maybe even just a coat hanger, a wire coat hanger, and you can put the magnet on there, and you can, or even a fish net, those have metal inside, and you can hold the magnet to the net, get the pump in place, and then hopefully tug the item away to let go of the magnet. And if you drop a magnet and it goes behind the tank, again, the coat hanger or a fish net or something can help you reach and have it snap to that, and you can extract it to use it again later. I've had a couple of situations where I had to use something made of metal, like the forceps, to hook up my top-off float. Not float, it's a electric sensor, and it uses a magnet on the outside, and there's no room behind the sump. So I used the tongs and I held the magnet in place, and then I put the sensor on the inside and they snapped together, and I could just gently tug those away and it stayed. So that's kind of nice when you're in a spot where it's really tight. Okay, Tim, I feel better. He says I'm just slightly past 25 years old. I've been lying to you guys for years. I've been 39 for a really long time. Scrolling down to questions. I don't even know where I am in the conversation, like how far back these go. That I've already answered. Teresa says, I have a 180-gallon tank. How much gallons per hour do I need? Let's just say you start at 10 times. So you need 1,800 gallons an hour of water moving through the display tank. Some people like 20 times turnover. Some like 30 times turnover. 40 times turnover. I mean, it really comes down to the corals. SPS corals can handle a lot of flow. The more chaotic, the better, because if it's just direct, laminar, strong, steady flow, it can actually, the coral could have tissue peel off the skeleton. But if it's constantly changing or the sea swirl is moving back and forth, the coral can kind of bulk up against the flow and handle it. And then it'll grow out and it'll adapt and it'll get better and better looking. So you can actually use quite a bit of flow with a lot of corals. The LPS corals don't need as much. And then of course soft corals, they don't really care one way or another. I mean, you don't need a lot of flow for soft coral, but like I said earlier, you got to have enough to clean the coral off. Like a leather coral, it needs to shed, and the flow blows the tissue off the skeleton and lands somewhere else. for your cleanup crew to devour or for you to remove yourself if you happen to maybe notice it in your tank. Comes down to the size of your tank. Dave says, what do you value more, fish or corals? What's the most expensive fish you've ever paid for? What's the most expensive coral you've ever paid for? Well, I'm a coral guy. And my own father said to me once that I decorate the tank with a few fish. He goes, where are all the fish? And it's true, you know, I mean, there's actually quite a few fish in here, but it doesn't look like it. I mean, there's just a little bit of activity. Where is everybody? There's a yellow tang, there's a yellow tang, there's 3 clownfish. I mean, it looks like nothing. But I have about 29 fish in this tank behind me. I've got about 14 or 15 in the anemone cube. There's 9 in the frag tank. And none were expensive. I'm not looking to spend a lot of money on fish. I believe that I got the tangs. The yellow tangs were purchased in California from a wholesaler, which I told you that story, and I'll never do that again. The Nassau tang and the purple tang came with my 280-gallon system that I bought used. I bought the hippo tang. Of course, I bought a lot of the fish. I bought wrasses, I bought the copper bands, I've bought, you know, the skunk clownfish. I don't think I've spent more than $100 on a fish, at the most. I can't think of a fish that cost more. I did spend, I believe, $325 on a rainbow Welsophilia many years ago in the fish store. I saw it, I had to have it, I didn't care what it cost, and then he told me how much it was, and I was like, oh my God, how many of these credit cards can you take at once? It was a lot of money, and I only had that coral for about 18 months or so, and then it just deteriorated. I don't know what happened, but I couldn't save any of it. None of it was salvageable, and I just lost the whole thing. I spent $200 on that little acan down there that's called a King's Ransom. A great name to warn you what it's going to cost. And that was the most expensive I paid for a coral in a decade. So I think that pretty much answers it. I'm not caught up in the whole $800 for an anemone or $1,600 for this or, you know, or that, or I don't want to buy a single polyp of a home wrecker. I just don't care. You know, I want some corals, and I love corals, and I like watching them grow. I like to know where they came from. If they came from a friend, like Drew's acro is growing right behind my head. I've got many corals that came from Dwayne, and so when I'm taking notes of pictures I've taken, I'll say Dwayne's dream catcher. I've got my own Melev's Shadowcaster behind me that I named myself because I cannot figure out who gave it to me. And no one seems to recognize it. No one seems to claim it. So I named it finally. So when people ask what is it called, I had a name. Okay. I'm just looking for questions. Tim says, do acan Lord Hoensis, the ones that aren't aggressive, put out filaments or long filaments or tentacles to eat? I have one that seems to be doing this, yet I haven't seen others do it. They do different things. So they can put out little tiny short tentacles that can capture food, and very gradually. Last night I tried to take a picture of this acan I was just talking about because it was really pretty, but nothing looked good on camera, so I gave up. There are also times where they put out mesenterial filaments that are more their warfare tentacles that they use to like aggressively eat their neighbor. Way more likely with Echinata, the aggressive one, versus the Lord Hoensis that is more friendly. And in that case, both techniques are kind of eating, but the little short stubby feeder tentacles are the normal, what I would consider food consumption versus attacking your neighbor and trying to eat him away so he's gone. Oh, also, you know, we talked so much about flow. I do want to remind you guys that if you don't have some kind of backup pump in your possession, you should buy one now while you're thinking about it. Whether it's a backup of the return pump, backup of the pump in your tank, Always having some kind of pump on hand in the closet, ready to go, is so important. What if you go on vacation and you're traveling and something dies in your tank? The tank sitter could literally swap out a pump and put another one in. You might have to talk them through it via text or FaceTime or Skype or Google Hangouts, but you could get flow in the tank. There was someone in the saltwater group on Facebook that had posted that her son was out of town, it was his aquarium, and that some pump had died, and I said, you should contact him immediately and let him know, because he'll give you the best advice of how to solve the problem because he knows his tank. And I noticed in her comment, she says, well, I did such and such, and he'll be home in a few days. And I was just like, oh my God. I would want to be contacted, whether it's an email or a text or an actual phone call. You know, I mean, if livestock's on the line, you know, I want to be told. And so you should let your tank sitter know. If something's really weird, or there's water on the floor, or there's this horrible sound, please contact me. I will get back to you as soon as I see it. But I don't want to find out 3 or 4 or 6 days later, because odds are you'll come home to a black tank of death. Derby says, what size tank are closed loops good for? Does it have to be a really large system? I did a closed loop on a 29 gallon. So you can do an any size tank. It comes down to where is the space for all the plumbing. Because a closed loop is going to be bulkhead, elbow, PVC pipe, pump, PVC pipe, bulkhead, and then maybe a strainer basket of some kind. And so, because you got to strain the water going out so nothing gets sucked into it to clog it. You don't want snails crawling in. You don't want anything going in there and getting into that pump. And then you need the output. That doesn't need to be covered because water's always blasting out of it forever. But any size tank, it just comes down to availability of space and what you're willing to tolerate. I could see it on a 40 breeder, I could see it on a 120 gallon, I could see it on a 500 gallon. Closed loops are very popular. They oftentimes save money efficiency-wise, especially if you have a really good circulation pump for the closed loop, as well as the fact you don't see anything in the tank, but maybe a little strainer basket on the back wall, which is nice, instead of seeing big pumps that have to be removed and cleaned. I'm skipping that one. That's something you have to ask Doc Brown, not me. Dave says, what pumps do you use and recommend? My tank has all Vortex. I have one Nero 5 on the frag system. I use Vectra return pumps and the Abyss return pump. The Abyss is very expensive. It's German made, comes with a 10-year warranty, and I've got the A200 on my tank, which is nearly $1,900 for that pump. Yes, I know, it's a lot. Heron asked the question about the Tunzi wave box, which I did talk about. I don't know if it was before you asked this question or after. Yeah, that'd be a great one for like a tank with gorgonians and seahorses and pipefish and maybe even garden eels. The wave box is quiet. It does its job in the corner. And because it is a square box, it hides the pump itself so you don't see it, which is nice because it just kind of blends in a little bit better. A lot of people in Germany specifically use Tunzi because it's from Germany. And it seems like all the hobbyists keep their gear very, very clean. So their wave boxes, their Turbell pumps, whatever they own, they always look brand new. And, you know, anytime I saw a picture of their tank, a picture of the system, everything looks clean and new. You don't see the coralline encrusted. You don't see hair algae, bubble algae, tube worms. It's just a clean, pristine box. And I find it very interesting that they stay on top of the cleaning so fastidiously compared to us. We tend to want everything to coralline over so we can't see it anymore. But you know, that bothers me actually. You know, for me, for my own tank, I actually like, oh, that looks filthy, and I will pull that out and clean it. But like right now, it's got purple coralline on it, so you'd think I'd be happy. But I'd much rather just be nice and pristine and pure black, and just hiding against a black background, than to have coralline on the glass and coralline on the powerhead. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know there was an aftermarket sea swirl. That's interesting, Nate. Thanks for letting me know. So they're available on Amazon. The original Seaflow company still exists, and he still makes those. And he makes them by hand. Each one is built by himself, by the owner. Michael Wells says, what modes do you recommend for the 2 MP40 Vortex on a 6-foot mixed reef tank? I love Reef Crest. That is my absolute favorite mode when it comes to the Vortex. And then maybe at night or once a week, you could do the nutrient export mode, which kind of does a whole bunch of surging and waves and stuff for 20 to 45 minutes. I mean, you can actually dictate the length of how long you want that. If you want to slow the flow down during feedings, which I understand some people do. Some people turn off everything when they feed the tank. I actually like flow moving through the tank to blow the food around and let the fish chase it a little bit. If you want to use lagoon mode during feeding, like if let's say you always feed every night at 8:30, you could start lagoon mode at 7:30 and have it run to 9:30 and just have that 2-hour window for when you're feeding, and the food won't move as hard through the tank, and then go back to its normal cascading effect of Reef Crest. I really do like Reef Crest. There's also steady mode, which just means on off, and it's at the percentage you pick. But my Vortex are all set up on they have 4 different modes they go throughout the day. And I programmed them once years ago. I never touch them. Occasionally I'll look at them, but even then I don't sit there and try to figure out how to change them. They are just doing their job. They're just moving the water. I keep it clean. I make sure it's quiet, and I'm happy. And the corals grow, and that's all that matters to me. This is something interesting I've seen some people do. They will take like a Vortex or some pump like it. Of course, now I can't do this because I'm trying to show it to you. And they will put it in the tank like this with no protective cage whatsoever, and they just say that the fish will stay away from it, which I guess they might, but it just seems like a great way to create some sushi in your tank accidentally, or have an anemone walk right into it and get just shredded, or a cucumber, or anything. So I definitely would always keep the cage on. I saw some people do that, and I was like, really? I was actually stunned that I even thought that was even an option. But I've seen people do it. El Turco says, can you please assist? Flow options for LPS, SPS, and soft corals. Well, we've kind of talked about that the whole time. But SPS need the most flow, LPS need less, soft corals even less. Typically, anyone that starts a new tank starts with soft corals because they're inexpensive and they fill in the tank quickly, and it's easy. And then you're like, oh, but I really like the hammer coral, I really like torch, or I like frog spawn, or I like acans, or I like fungias, or I like favias, or I like favites. And then you're like, well, if I can keep all those alive, maybe I need some SPS. Then you end up like me with a mixed reef that has all 3 types in one tank. So you have a lot of flow at the top, you have medium flow in the middle, and you have low flow at the bottom. So that's the best I can do to answer you that question. But I'm looking at your profile picture, and it looks like you have a really pretty tank. So keep up the good work. Daryl says, I have a 180-gallon tank with 2 Neptune powerheads and a 550 going in the tank and a 450 return. These sound like gyres. I'm not sure what those 2 numbers are, sorry. And the pumps are running at 50%. Is that good for the tank? It might be a good starting point, but you might need to crank it up. You might see that 65% or 80% is even better. But just kind of look and see what's going on. Keep in mind, again, brand new tank, brand new sand, things move a lot. Then as bacteria spreads, then things kind of start congealing and holding on to itself. You can probably increase the flow and see some really good results in the tank. Martinus, I'm not saying UPSs are great, but a lot of people buy them. That's why I talk about them. But like for the Vortex, I use a deep cycle battery that's designed by Ecotech that keeps all my Vortex running. And it actually is DC. And it talks directly to the driver, so it doesn't actually use the AC plug. But there's a lot of people that just have like a MaxiJet or an air pump they plug in, and you can plug that directly into a UPS. And yeah, it's not ideal, but it's definitely better than watching the tank die. So that's why I talk about it on this channel. Obviously, generator is going to be always your best bet because you can create a lot of unlimited flow while you wait for the city to solve whatever's wrong with your power. Trent says, how long would the water have to stagnate before it becomes poisonous or bad to the tank? It could be hours. It could be a 9-hour duration. It could be a 6-hour duration. It depends what's in the area where it happened. Like the overflow box, if it's sitting there for 9, 12, 15 hours and there's like 5 gallons in each overflow box, you could have 10 gallons of toxic soup that's going to drain into your sump as soon as the power comes on. So that one I would suck dry. And I wouldn't even put more water in, obviously, until you're ready to start the pump up again. And then when your return pump's going, then you can add more salt water to the system. And you'll know you need to because your return pump will start sucking in air bubbles. You need more salt water. In reactors, I've watched biopellets just turn gray and smell like death within a few hours. That's one of those things that if you're running biopellets, they even recommend you plug the biopellet reactor's pump into a battery backup so it's always has circulation even on a power outage, because the oxygen level just plummets inside the biopellet reactor. And the biopellets will actually turn gray. They'll turn to sludge. And like I said, it smells awful. So that one's an important one that you would have to drain. I would do the same thing with any other reactor. GFO, carbon, anything that's sitting stagnant for a while, drain them and then refill them with new, fresh, clean salt water. Jeffrey says, do you recommend circulation pump in the top-off container? No, that's the one place you don't need any kind of circulation. Actually, adding circulation to your top-off container could make the water dirtier because it would actually encourage anything to land in your freshwater through the cavitation, through the movement. It's creating essentially a vortex, and it's sucking in something from somewhere. So we have zero flow. My return zone here, my top-off container down here has, this is the new one, but I had another one there for 8 years. And all it ever had was the tiny little pump to push water into my sump as evaporation occurred. And the water was always 0 to 1 TDS. I mean, it was amazing how clean that thing stayed, considering it was 8 years old and I could not remove it to clean it. When I built the new sump earlier this year, I built a new top-off container that I can actually physically, if it's empty, remove, clean out, and set up again. But it looks like the day I installed it right now, and it's very pristine, and there's no movement in there at all. You don't need to. The only time we want circulation is salt water. And salt water, like if you mix salt water, let's say you made a 55-gallon barrel and you need 30 gallons tomorrow and you have 20 gallons left, as long as you keep a small heater in there that's rated for 20 gallons, and you have a power head of some kind, like a MaxiJet or a Tunzi or whatever, just keep the water circulating. That water will be still healthy and usable for your tank later. And you could keep it in circulation for weeks. I just put a cover on top of the barrel so nothing gets into the water to pollute it. Do you ever freshwater dip zoas? No, because I'm not a huge zoa collector. There's a few in my tank, and they are just doing their thing. They aren't doing great. They aren't doing badly. They're just alive. And I'm not one of those guys that's constantly dealing with zoas. Like someone with a smaller tank, they're always adding more little beautiful flowers. I guess the one person you would want to ask is that Holla Back At Ya boy. I think that's the name of his channel. And he loves zoanthids. He has tons of them. And he might have some good advice for you. He's got a YouTube channel too. Oh, we didn't talk about this. Can you go over how to set up a water surge into the tank, like the Long Island Aquarium has? There's actually a lot of aquariums that have surge tanks. And it's a, it's a method of pumping water up high, and when the barrel fills up to a certain amount, it will then surge all that water into the display tank, and then it refills that container up over time. And the one that's on, that you'll find in Google is called the Carlson's surge device, or Carlson surge tank. And it basically is sort of like a flushing motion, like when we flush the tank on a toilet, and that tank drains rapidly and creates the water to shoot down the drain. Well, same principle. You have this container up high, and it will dump all this water into your tank all at once. The downside of a surge tank is that, number one, if the door doesn't close quickly enough on the surge, it'll have water and air, and you'll see water and air pumping into your tank, which leads to salt spray. And salt spray, call it salt creep, and you have stuff, everything's getting filthy, including light fixtures and the top rim of your tank and auto feeders and whatever else you have up, fans, anything that's up there will get some salt creep on them because it's constantly getting this fizz from a surge. The other problem with the surge is every time it surges and dumps in, let's pick a number. Let's say it dumps in 20 gallons of water into your system. 20 gallons of water will literally go from the tank into the sump and raise the water level in the sump a few inches. And then over time, water's pumping from the sump into the surge tank to drain down the 20 gallons again. Well, you see, the thing that's happening is with that extra water being dumped into the system, it's throwing off the top-off kit, so it doesn't know when to replenish. And I was actually behind one of the public aquariums in Dubai, and they had a huge surge tank going, and they had this monster, and I mean monster, I filmed it for you guys, monster overflow box that you could actually watch the water level rise in the overflow box when the surge happened, because the sump has to be a consistent level. So all the reaction that you saw from that water dumping into the public display would then gush over into this humongous overflow box, and you could see the overflow box getting fuller and fuller and fuller, and then it would go back down. So they must have put some kind of a gate valve to control how much water drains down to hold it all in the overflow box, which was made of concrete. It was a monster thing. But it was really interesting to watch, and I was like, how are they handling the surge? Because when you dump the surge, it will affect the water level in your sump, and that's you can't ignore it. If you said, well, look, I'm going to use a surge all day long when I'm awake because I love it, you might need to disable your top off until night. And then that night, it starts replacing water that's evaporated because now the surge is disabled and now top off can do its job. Or maybe you have to, once an hour, stop the surge for 15 minutes, let the top off do its job, and then disable the top off and go back to the surge again for 45 minutes. That's another way of doing it. But the thing is, you also have to have this container up high, higher than the tank. The higher the better for a really good flush. And that might require putting it up in the attic, or up, if the room's really, really tall, you can have it way up high on a very secure shelf. Because think about it, 20 gallons is 200 pounds. So it's got to be a really sturdy shelf to hold that weight. And then it's going to gush down, and from time to time you have to crawl up there and clean it and deal with whatever's going on with it. So there's some mechanics you have to keep in mind too. But I think that would be helpful to keep those things in mind if you're going to go that route. And if you do it, I want to see it. Be sure you post something in Club Melevsreef. Club Melevsreef is our group on Facebook, and this is where we communicate with each other on a daily basis, and we ask questions, and we show off pictures, and we ask, what do you guys think? It's a really good group. Yes, Drop Bear RC says that you should use a food grade silicone lubricant for O-rings. And you absolutely can. So when you have an O-ring like this one or a black one or whatever color they come in, you can get silicone grease and you can just apply a thin skin of it. You buy it. It used to come like a little Carmex case. So you flip the lid up and you just took a daub on your finger. Now it looks like a very small toothpaste tube and you squeeze it out. I find them at Home Depot in the aisle where they sell the faucets, and especially where all the parts for the faucets are, like the strainers and the stems and the washers. They'll have silicone grease, and you can ask them specifically for it. Silicone grease is food grade, which makes it safe for our aquariums. And it's definitely something you would want to use inside the O-ring of a union. And the union itself, unscrew it when you first take it apart to like work in there, put it on the outside threads. That way when you tighten the nut down 6 months from now or a year from now, you can loosen that nut again because of the silicone grease on the threads. So it's really important. Always lubricate the O-ring and lubricate those threads so you can actually unscrew a union later. And every single tank I set up, as soon as I'm putting it on, I put the silicone grease on there. And people have said, why are you doing that? I said, because one day I'm going to want to unscrew this without having to bust out the wrenches. I love this. Just got a DIY. Great name. Said, Get an acrylic tank, then you don't have to worry about the wave action. You can just go at it as long as you want. You're probably right, because acrylic does have some give to it, and you're not relying on silicone to hold it all together. Acrylic is bonded together, it's glued together. Marcus says, I now use Vortec pumps, and from time to time I hear a rattling sound. What is that? The nocerius snails getting their shells hit? Something's going on in there. All right, so sometimes the motor on the outside, the dry side, isn't perfectly aligned with the wet side inside the tank, and if you just lift it up or just find that sweet spot, it'll get really quiet. That could be part of it. The other thing that may happen, especially with an older wet side, they used to have a white circle right here, and that white thing would just waller out. It was like ceramic, and it just finally had an issue. And you could replace that little tiny insert, and that would make it quiet. Sometimes the simplest solution is to get a new wet side. I know that's not the inexpensive solution, but I like things that last, and if something is going out on me, I just replace it with a new one, because that way I don't have to think about it, and I don't have to hear it. So, I mean, yesterday, I was hearing a funny sound from one of those two Vortex, and I was like, what is going on? And my solution was to turn it off and turn it on, and it just became quiet again. So I'm not sure what it was, but both of those are due to be removed, and they're going to go in that acid solution and get cleaned this weekend. So maybe that was something you ran into. Usually it's the alignment thing, or just got out of alignment, but it could actually be a physical defect. Something inside the wet side needs some TLC. Another thing that happens with Vortec wet sides is the magnet sometimes does swell, especially the older models. The magnet's not forever. These have a really nice magnet in them, and every time I take them apart and clean them, I've actually never had one of that type of magnet fail. It was the old ones that seemed like they were cocooned in plastic. The plastic would split and the magnet would rust. And I think that's why they replaced them with a newer style. So maybe the balance is out of whack. You know, the magnet has swollen, there's a little split, and so it's not spinning perfectly smoothly, and it's creating like a rattly sound. That could be a thing. So you might have to take it apart and take a look at it. Yeah, see, that's my point about flame scallops, Trent. He said he had one when he started saltwater, and he had them for 8 months. And that's kind of the length of time they tend to stay alive for us, is about 8 months. So 6 to 8 months, it's not a long-term thing. If I got a bunch of flame scallops, I want to have them for like 5 years. So I would like to feed them something that will keep them alive long-term. And I'm guessing or hoping or relying on melevsreef to be that thing that would keep them alive and happy for a long time, and happy as a clam. So yeah, it's not always just phytoplankton. Sometimes it's other stuff. Hey, Rogue Aquarium. Thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Prosperous 2020. That sounds good. Water on the Floor says, I'm running 2 successful nano tanks on 1 large sump, and I have 2 different algae running. So I'm doing alternating harvesting. Are the different algae useful in pulling out different nutrients out of the water? Kind of doubt that. I kind of feel like macroalgae pull out the same nutrients, but I could be wrong. I'm not 100% positive on that answer to you. But as long as your tanks themselves don't have algae issues, then I think you're doing a great job. And that's what matters most. It's not so much what the macroalgae is or isn't doing, it's how does the tank look. If the tank looks good, even if the refugium plants don't look great, they're still doing what you need to keep the display algae-free, which is, of course, our goal. But I don't believe different macroalgae pull out different nutrients. I'm not aware of that. Mark says, is there a way to get rid of copper from live rock? I've got some rocks from a fish-only tank, and I'm wondering if I can treat them and use them with a new reef tank. I'm going to say no. The general rule of thumb is once rock has been in a tank treated with copper, that rock will never be used in a reef tank because the invertebrates won't be able to handle it. I don't even know if corals would do well. you may run into problems with corals too, but invertebrates absolutely can't. The copper, there's just like no copper sponge on the market. You could try to run a ton of carbon and try to keep wicking it out, but it just keeps coming out of the rock forever. Rock with copper is kind of like one and done. That rock will always be used for like a quarantine tank or a hospital tank where you're going to treat with copper, and that rock never leaves that tank. But you can't put it in a reef tank, unfortunately. Carlos says, I received an Apex. Congratulations for Christmas. And I'm putting it on my water box aquarium. I'm looking at the wave units from Neptune. Are they easy to set up? I think they are pretty easy to set up. You basically install them on the glass. They use a magnet to hold in place, and then you program them through Apex Fusion. And they're very popular. The one thing you need to know about the wave pumps, and it's Wave, W-A-V, that's the name. How the cord comes off the pump matters. And I was really surprised to hear this. And I'm saying the word here, which is ironic, because apparently if the cord is not in a certain way, you'll hear a vibration. And you adjust the cord and the pump is quiet. So just be aware of that. If you hear something that's bothering you, it could be you have to adjust the power cord so it's not vibrating. I don't know why that is. That was really surprised when I first heard it. I thought people were crazy. And then it turns out it's a real thing. So just be aware of that. It's not a deal breaker. It's just something that you want to know so you can fix it. Neil says, all my corals are doing great, but my candy cane is shriveled up. What flow and lighting does the candy cane need? Candy cane coral, or colastria, is a large polyp stony. It's in the LPS family. And they really do well down low. You can put them way down on the sand. You can actually take the skeleton, push down the sand, and have low flow. If it's closed up or stays super tight, it could be that something in the water isn't right. It could even be that there's cyanobacteria inside of it that's killing it. I had this one hammer coral, it was a whole bunch of it, and it was dying in my tank, and I thought, what is going on? And I really couldn't solve it, and everything else, literally everything else in the tank was perfect, but that one coral was miserable. And I had that crazy theory, maybe there's cyano in there, so I treated the tank with ChemiClean, and 3 days later, there was no trace of, I didn't have cyano on the sand. I just had a hammer coral that wasn't happy. But when I was done, the hammer completely healed, and I attributed it to being inside. Because cyanobacteria actually always exists in our tanks. We just don't like it when it's red and visible. But when it's invisible, we don't care that it exists. And I think that it was inside, and that was a problem. All right. We're going to have to wrap this up soon. I've got someone that wants to come over here shortly. Screams Reef says, is your Nero still making noise? No, it's been quiet for the last week and a half. I haven't had to do anything. I took it off today to clean off the screen. It was covered with bubble algae that's been amassing, and I had to clean the screen off and throw it all off, so I had to unplug it and plug it in, but it's still dead silent. I had taken it apart about 15 days ago or 14 days ago and cleaned it with a toothbrush and put it together, and it's been quiet ever since. But I don't know how long it's going to last. I've had it running for over a year now. And I guess that's the question. The people want to know the durability. How long can you get out of that pump? But it is the only power head in that frag tank. Let's see if I can do this. I don't know if I can, but I can try. Haven't looked at this in forever, so I don't even know where it is. And I have to remember my password. So let's scooch this over. Someone asked me if I could show them my vortex schedule, so I'm looking for it for you. And it looks like I could speed it up. All right. So Hang on just one second here. This is my schedule. Let's see if I can shrink this down. No? Oh, hang on. I think it's over here. Oh, it is shrunk down. So this is my schedule for the MP60s and the MP40s. And I'm running constant speed. It looks like during the nighttime, throughout the night, it's around 35%. It goes up to reef crest for most of the day from 8 a.m. to about 1 o'clock. Then I do tidal swell at 60% for whatever that is, 1:30 to 4:30, 5:30. And then lagoon mode for the evening, and then back to constant speed for an hour. That's right after feeding the tank, so it slows down during that period so the food can stay on the corals. And I've had that exact same schedule on both tanks. That's what I do. And I might turn them up now that I've had this conversation with you guys today. Mina says, how does flow help the nitrogen cycle? Does it help at all? Flow is an important part of gas exchange to get the CO2 out of the tank and to get oxygen into the tank. And a lack of flow, the oxygen level drops, it plummets, and the fish struggle to breathe. So it's really important. And even in tanks where the power's been out for hours on end because of a power outage and the fish are dying, the corals never look better. They're wide open, they're comfortable, they got feeder tentacles out. I mean, it's crazy. The look of the tank just vastly changes, and you almost hate to turn the flow on, except the fish are dying. So it's really important to have that nice, clear, rippling water, and a protein skimmer is so important to a tank. And that's one of those things that people are starting to feel like maybe they don't need a protein skimmer, or maybe they should turn it off part of the day. I feel like the protein skimmer is the heart of the tank. I feel like it's so important. It can catch anything that's going wrong, and the bubbles in the body of the protein skimmer are actually driving off CO2. And by getting rid of that extra CO2, the pH in the tank comes up. So not running a skimmer, you're doing the opposite. You're allowing CO2 to stay in the tank and pH to get lower. So I really recommend good gas exchange on your tank. Now, I'm not talking about the nitrogen. So I believe we're not talking about just the regular cycle of a tank with ammonia, nitrite, nitrate. You're talking about oxygenation, I believe. I hope I'm answering that correctly for you. And if I didn't, that's okay. I'll get it right next year. Aqua Girls Talks says, I have a question about Maxima clams from your other video. Mine put a foot through the sand and to the bottom of the glass. And it moves and turns itself, but I saw it should be attached to rock. It doesn't matter what it holds onto. If you have it holding onto the glass, or if it holds onto a rock, or it holds onto another clamshell, it's just holding on. If you need to move it to another tank, or move it from one place to another place, you're going to want to very carefully cut like between the foot and the surface, like maybe with a credit card or something, so you don't damage the foot. You kind of want to get under it, just like we do under the foot of an anemone. And we want to kind of peel the skin back and make it release so we can move it to a new location. That's why one of the benefits of putting the clam on an empty clamshell is great, because it can grab onto that and hold onto it for the rest of its life, and you can move that clam anywhere you want in the tank. Big L Dog says, where can you pick up PhosRx from? If you mean Phosphate RX, I sell it on my website. And I haven't mentioned it once in this broadcast today, but I need to say it out loud so you hear it, is that when you guys buy things from my website, the shipping fee always seems really high. And it depends on the product. If you buy something big, the shipping makes sense. When you buy something tiny, it doesn't make any sense at all. And so a lot of the tiny things that you guys are buying, like the VCA screens or the nozzle or whatever, or you get Live Rock Enhance, or you get Phosphate RX, or you get Red Cyan RX, these are all little tiny boxes that weigh 2 or 3 ounces. I can ship those for $6. So when you buy something from my website, if I can refund you some of the money on shipping, I always will. And so if I can ship it first class instead of FedEx and save you $8, $10, $12, I do it. And I just send that refund to you. I'm not here trying to gouge you guys on shipping. That is just what FedEx charges to get it to you. And what's happened in the past is when I had UPS on there, I'm sorry, USPS, which is the post office, people were choosing that as an option for huge items. And I couldn't stop them, so I got rid of it because it was causing more chaos than anything. But I send refunds to people every single day when shipments go out. And a lot of people are like, I had a guy from Hawaii, he ordered for me, and he sent me an email, and he says, I have never been refunded by anyone because shipping to Hawaii is always expensive. We're used to it. And he was really happy to get like a $30 refund in shipping because I was able to ship it for $10 instead of $40. And yeah, of course I'm going to do that. I get it. I buy things online too. And I like to save money on shipping whenever I can. But these boxes have to get to you. Everything inside the box has to get to you safely. I pack things very carefully. I don't just fling it in a box. You guys matter to me. And I do the refunds because I want you to save as much as you can, but I realize I cannot afford to give you free shipping. So a lot of little things are $6, and then bigger things might be $12 to $18, and sometimes it's something big and it's $40 or $200. It just depends. Big sumps cost a fortune to ship, but fortunately most of the things people buy are small, and so I give out a lot of refunds. And I'm happy to do so. I don't even mind. I mean, other than it's a hassle, but it makes you guys happy, and it makes me happy that you're happy. Naked Reefer says, Super Chat! Thank you very much for watching the live stream. I appreciate it. Now go put on some clothes! This is not Naked Saturday. Tim says, could we maybe make a dedicated page on the Facebook group where everyone can list their tanks, the fish, equipment they use, the corals, everything they got? There's really the Facebook group is pretty limited to what they allow us to do. But if you ever just want to do like a tank diary and you just want to like share a lot of stuff about it, you can. And some people that were authors, made their own little big post with like 64 pictures and a big description. They will keep finding their thread and adding more new information below with new pictures or attach a new video and more descriptions. And so it becomes kind of like a build thread, but it's still buried in the Facebook environment. It's not like a super easy thing to follow like you do with build threads on Reef to Reef. But I like what you're thinking. Today is Saturday, which is Water Test Saturday. It's very important you test your water. Please test your water. I know you don't want to. It's the holiday and you want to relax, but you got to test the water. And last week's live stream was all about water quality. And by testing your water, you're staying ahead of things going wrong and making minor little corrections now before you need big corrections later. So pull out all your test kits, use them for the last time this year, and if it's time for new test kits, order a bunch of new test kits for the new year. I always like seeing when you guys post your results on Club melevsreef. Sometimes people post them on Instagram, and we do hashtag post your results, hashtag water testing, and then at melevsreef so I can see it. And if you have a private Instagram where no one can see it unless they are friends with you, it's kind of pointless because we can't see it. So your Instagram does need to be public, like mine. That way people can see what you're sharing. Oh, okay, correction. So Nate had mentioned there was a knockoff sea squirrel. He meant the motor inside is something you can get off Amazon. And that makes sense. Everything's on Amazon. You name it, it's on there. Let's get that off of there. Let's 5 more minutes and then we're going to stop. Carl says, can I run a skimmer that's overrated for my reef tank? My reef tank is 200 liters and I've got a skimmer that's rated for 2,000 liters. No, you can't. I mean, you can, but you can't. It's too big for the water volume. And the problem is there's just not enough dissolved organic compounds or DOCs in the water to create a good foam head to export. What's going to happen is your skimmer's almost going to surge. It'll pull stuff out and it'll do nothing for a long time. And then it'll pull something out and it'll do nothing. It just won't do the job right because it's 10 times bigger than your tank. You know, nowadays protein skimmers are really, I feel like they're matched way closer to reality. In the old days, we just never believed their numbers and we had to oversize to make it do the job. But nowadays we have much better equipment. Things are dialed in, they're way more precise. I don't know, are they more scientific? And so it really is important that you go ahead and use a skimmer that's closer to the rating of your tank. Now what you can do is sell the one that's way too big to someone else and use that money to buy the right size skimmer for your tank. That would be my recommendation. But I mean, if you don't believe me and you want to try it, feel free and let me know how it goes for you. But odds are it's not going to go well. Macy's Daddy says, do you know what events you'll be doing in 2020? Yes, I am going to be at Aquashella in Dallas. I'm going to be at an event in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm going to be at MACNA. I'm going to be at Comic-Con in San Diego. I'm going to be visiting family, of course. And I've got a trip on the books. Oh, Niagara Falls is coming up. And there's a trip also to Brazil that is happening. So those are some things happening. And then in 2021, I've got a dive trip that I think I mentioned to you guys last week that's going to cost me a fortune, and so that's why it's almost 18 months away. And that one's going to be in Indonesia. So those are my upcoming trips. And I hope to not add more trips. I literally want to travel less. This year was a ton of travel. So anything I do less would make me happy. We're near the end of the chat. Yay! Best way to... Oh, so let's throw it on the screen. Coulter says, the best way to safely clean your hands before doing tank maintenance. I usually wash my hands with a small amount of Dawn and then make sure to rinse really well. You know what I do? I mean, my hands are essentially clean. I'm a clean guy, and I keep them clean, and I rinse them all the time. I mean, every time I reach in the sink or reach in the fridge or stir a cup of coffee, I rinse off my hands. I don't think that's OCD. God, I hope not. But I do. I rinse and I dry off on the paper on a cloth towel. And so whenever I have to reach in my tank, I rinse my hands and I work in my tank, and then I rinse my hands. And if I have to go back in the tank, I rinse my hands. But I usually pull out Dawn to wash my hands or use a bar of soap in the bathroom if I had to like mow the grass or take out the trash or something, or work on the car. Then I'm using the pumice. And I really want to get that all clean. But then I keep my hands out of the tank for a while. I don't use lotions. I don't touch things that have chemicals on them for the most part, except when I'm working with acrylic, obviously. But and then I just rinse and I put my hands on the tank. If you are using lotions or there's a chance of some kind of pollutants, I would rinse really well. You can do rubber gloves, but the thing is water will get in the gloves and whatever is on your skin will come out of the gloves and get into the system. So that's why I'm suggesting rinsing is my primary. So, if you're petting animals like a dog or a cat or a hamster or a bunny, rinse your hands before you put them in the tank. And you know my rule, I hate to get my arm wet. I actually try never to reach my tank if I don't have to, and I only get in there occasionally. So, my rinsing is really more to make me feel clean than it is to do with the tank. But I do. Like when I was working on the skimmer the other day and cleaning all the parts, there was a lot of rinsing and drying off my hands and then go at it. Something else some people worry about is the towel you dry your hands off. Does it have something on the towel from the laundry detergent or even from the Downy or those dryer sheets you put in the dryer? Is that chemical? So some people are super cautious and they have a bunch of towels only for the aquarium and they only go through a rinse cycle and they go in the dryer with no kind of fabric softener and they only use them for their aquarium so that there's no chance that any of those products like bleach or soap or detergent or fabric softener can get in their tank. So I actually prefer to just clean all my towels at the same time, and they go in. I have a pile for the fish room, and I have a pile for myself, and they get laundered normally. I've never felt like I had to avoid using soap on my towels that are going to be used for drying off in the fish room or for mopping up messes or whatever. Oh, yeah, someone mentioned my shirt being a little crazy. I'll show it to you guys. Let me back up. So this is a shirt that is from Project Seacor. And what it is you got your trees, you got your forest, and then you go down into the water and then you got your whales. And it says, for the reef, for our future. And I really liked it. And I said, I need this shirt. So I got it at MACNA a year ago. I really like it. Sean, you're here just in time for me to say, all right, guys, thanks for tuning in. we're done. This is pretty much the end of the live stream, but good job, Sean. Make sure you watch the playback because there was a lot of good things we talked about today. And Matos, thank you very much for tuning in from Belgium. I appreciate that. And Carlos says, I gotta see that pie one more time. So it's actually more like a giant cookie. And it's got a nice thick crust. You can see the inside there. And there's all the raspberry preserves. And it's very handmade. It's actually not very symmetrical. I didn't do a great job on the look, but I tried my best. And I didn't burn it, and it's super moist, and it's delicious. And it's called a Linzer Torte, L-I-N-Z-E-R-T-O-R-T-E. All right, guys, now that I smell that, guess who's going to have some? I'm going to let you guys go, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you next year. Bye.